Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the highest rampart of Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, gazing upon the endless stretch of churning sea that surrounded the island. The wind whipped at her silver-gold hair, blowing in wild tangles around her face. Yet her violet eyes were fixed not on the sea but on the colossal shadows that danced against the setting sun. The largest of those shadows belonged to Drogon, her firstborn dragon who had grown in scale and might far beyond even Daenerys' wildest imagination. In days long past, there had been tales of Balerion the Dread, the black-scaled beast that Aegon the Conqueror had ridden across the skies to unite the Seven Kingdoms by fire and blood. Balerion was said to be so large that his shadow could swallow entire towns in darkness and his jaws could devour mammoths whole. But standing there now as Drogon unfurled his monstrous wings, Daenerys marveled at the sheer enormity of her living children. Once she had feared for their survival, for the world was full of dangers, from the cunning of men like Euron Greyjoy to the unholy menace of the White Walkers to the bitter cold of the north. Now, as she watched Drogon soar, she witnessed the result of their unstoppable growth. The black scales of the dragon's hide glistened like obsidian in the dying light, so thick and massive that no spear or ballista could ever hope to pierce them. Even Rhaegal and Viserion, smaller siblings once overshadowed by Drogon, had swelled into creatures so vast they rivaled the largest warships in both girth and length. Each day, it seemed, they grew larger, hungrier, and fiercer. She could scarcely believe that once, in the Red Waste, they had been the size of cats. Now they dwarfed even the legendary Balerion himself, whose jawbone was displayed as a relic of a more heroic age in the vaults of the Red Keep. Hers were living gods of fire and flame, seemingly unstoppable no matter what threat the world devised. And Daenerys' heart swelled with fierce pride, for these dragons were her children, her weapons, and her destiny. She intended to use them to reshape the world just as her ancestors once had. Yet even though the realm was divided, with alliances shifting in the face of war and an icy terror creeping toward them from the far north, she felt an ember of hope burning in her chest. Jon Snow arrived behind her. She could hear his footsteps, heavy but careful, across the ancient stone. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "They've grown again," he said softly, as though struck by awe. "I saw Drogon fly above the castle gates, his wings blocked out the sun for a moment." Daenerys turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "They are truly wonders, Jon. But there is still so much to do. There is Cersei and King's Landing and Euron Greyjoy's fleet to consider. He's fashioned new weapons to kill my dragons, or so they say." Jon furrowed his brow. "I've heard rumors of bolts the size of small trees, scorpions that can pierce a dragon's hide. But from what I can see, these dragons have hides thick as castle walls." An unspoken question lingered between them. Could even such monstrous dragons be threatened by mortal steel or the eerie magic of the White Walkers? The stories said that obsidian was the bane of the others, and that the Night King possessed terrifying powers over the dead. But would all that pale in comparison to the sheer might of these flying behemoths, with their hides like fortress ramparts? Daenerys reached out and took Jon's hand. "They will protect us all," she said, "and we will protect them. Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, they are more than weapons to me. They are part of my very soul." In the fading light, Drogon let loose a thunderous roar. Fire burst from his jaws in a crimson torrent. Daenerys felt warmth rush through her blood, a primal sense of connection shared between mother and child. That night, Daenerys and Jon convened with Tyrion Lannister, her hand, in the map room of Dragonstone. The table, carved into an ancient relief of Westeros, flickered with candlelight. Tyrion paced anxiously around the edges, running his hand over the painted hills and valleys, as though imagining the sweep of a war. "You've heard the news from the north," Tyrion began, voice hushed. "The army of the dead marches ever closer to the wall, and the reports from King's Landing suggest that Queen Cersei has no intention of joining forces. She's hoarding resources, forging alliances with mercenaries in Essos." Daenerys nodded slowly. "The Golden Company," she said. "Or so the rumors claim." "Yes," Tyrion answered. "Tens of thousands of them, financed by the crown's gold. But there's something else. Euron Greyjoy, proud as ever, seems to think he has a way to bring down one of the dragons. A new kind of scorpion with heavier bolts. Apparently he's boasted in the streets of King's Landing that this time, his aim will be true." Jon looked from Tyrion to Daenerys. "He can try," he said, "but he's never faced dragons like these. I've seen them up close now, felt the heat from their flames. The scorpions Qyburn invented before barely injured Drogon. And Drogon has grown since then. All of them have. He paused, remembering what Davos once told him. That the realm needed proof of the dead men rising, that only the fires of dragons could save them from the long night. Now, with such gigantic creatures at their disposal, perhaps the living truly had the upper hand. The Night King. We don't know what magics he might wield, Tyrion said, his tone more cautious. We cannot underestimate him. Even a creature as mighty as your dragons might be vulnerable to the white ravening cold. If not physically, perhaps through sorcery. We just don't know. Daenerys stood with regal composure. We do not know, she said. But I will not cower. The Seven Kingdoms need me, need all of us, to stand against the darkness. We will fly north soon to see for ourselves what horrors march beyond the wall. And if it comes to a confrontation, then let the world see the power of my dragons. They will know fire and blood as my ancestors once did. Her confidence was unwavering. Even Tyrion, so prone to cautious reflection, found himself strangely reassured. She had, after all, walked through fire, birthed dragons from stone eggs, crossed the sea, and survived countless tribulations. Now she was queen in all but name, commanding winged gods that the world had not seen the like of since the dawn of Targaryen rule. Far below, in the great courtyard of Dragonstone, the dragons feasted by moonlight. Fishing boats returned with monstrous hauls each day, while flocks of sheep and cattle were sent from allied lords seeking to curry favor. Crates of salted meat stacked near the kitchens disappeared within hours once the dragons caught scent, and they roared for more. Once the largest beasts in the land were mammoths in the Shadowlands or whales in the Summer Sea. Now, these dragons put them all to shame. The watchers on the walls trembled each time one of the dragons passed overhead. At first, it was fear, but gradually it became a kind of reverence. Many whispered that the gods themselves had returned to Westeros, that these monstrous dragons were the sign of a new age. And if you asked Daenerys, perhaps that was true. Morning found Daenerys in the castle yard, speaking softly to Drogon as he bent his colossal neck down to nuzzle her. The top of his skull towered over her, the ridges like jagged mountains of black horn. When he opened his jaw, steam and smoke rolled out, the faint glow of inner fire dancing along his teeth. His eyes, like pools of molten gold, watched her with uncanny intelligence. She stroked his snout, and despite the hardened scales, she could feel the familiar warmth of his breath. "Hush now," she whispered. "You are my strength. You are my life." Drogon gave a low rumble in response, a nearly affectionate sound that seemed impossible from such a monstrous beast. Rhaegal and Viserion perched at the far corners of the castle walls, their wings folded, but their sharp eyes watched every movement. Jon stood to one side with Davos and Missandei, all three of them transfixed by the spectacle of a queen who commanded such unimaginable power. Davos stepped forward, glancing to Missandei as if to confirm that it was safe to approach. "Your Grace," he said respectfully. "We have word from the Citadel. Archmaester Ambrose has sent ravens. The winter storms are growing heavier, and the dead may soon find ways around Eastwatch. He advises an immediate response." Daenerys turned her head, still resting a hand on Drogon. "Then we must fly," she said. "I will not wait for them to breach the wall. If we act now, we can bring fire upon them before they scatter across the north." Missandei stepped forward, her face set in calm resolve. "Your Grace, I will make arrangements. The Unsullied stand ready, and the Dothraki scouts are eager to ride." Daenerys nodded. "Good. Tyrion will remain here to oversee any messages or negotiations with our would-be allies. Jon, you will come with me, see with your own eyes the threat that faces your people." Jon nodded, solemn. He still felt the echoes of disbelief whenever he saw the dragons, for he had grown up on stories of their extinction. Now, these flying mountains of scale and flame were the realm's best hope. He felt an odd stirring in his chest, hope, yes, but also fear. For he knew the Night King had powers that defied mortal comprehension. Yet these dragons were bigger than Balerion the Dread, perhaps bigger than anything that had walked the skies of this world in thousands of years. If any living force could stand against the army of the dead, it would be them. Soon, the castle buzzed with the frantic energy of departure. Dothraki screamers rode to the beaches, carrying arms and supplies for the journey north. The Unsullied marched in perfect ranks, their spears and shields like an unyielding tide of steel. Daenerys instructed her handmaidens on how to manage the castle in her absence, though part of her suspected the entire affair might be settled quickly once her dragons showed their might. When the sun rose high enough to burn away the last of the morning mist, Daenerys climbed atop Drogon's immense back. His scales were warm beneath her, and the ridges that once served as footholds had become gargantuan, each spike as thick around as a grown man. She felt small astride him, the queen of a living mountain of fire. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked them, each with Dothraki archers strapped in makeshift saddles on their backs, a notion that had once seemed impossible but which now gave the Dothraki an ecstatic thrill. The dragons were no longer so easily weighed down by a handful of riders. Their bulk was simply beyond such concern. Jon climbed atop Rhaegal at Daenerys' urging, for she insisted he share her vantage. Though he struggled at first to situate himself along the dragon's spines, he managed to find a position behind the broadest ridge. Rhaegal growled softly but made no move to dislodge him, as if acknowledging his mother's authority. Viserion carried a pair of the Dothraki blood riders who gazed down at the land below as though seeing a new world. They lifted off in a thunderous flap of wings that kicked up swirling dust and sea spray. Drogon roared as he climbed into the sky, overshadowing the entire castle below. The people of Dragonstone gaped in awe. In formation, they soared northward, unstoppable, unstoppable. The day was calm, the sky a brilliant blue, and the sight of 3 massive dragons blackening the horizon was enough to leave onlookers speechless for miles around. The flight was swift. Great sweeps of wind carried them across the narrow sea toward the mainland, and the dragon's colossal wings made the journey that once took ships' days seem effortless. Below, they saw farmlands, villages, and scattered armies. Some cheered as the dragons passed overhead. Others shrank in terror, and the dragons roared in greeting or warning, leaving no doubt that the old days were returning, when the Targaryens soared across the skies unchallenged. Jon held tightly to Rhaegal's scaled hide, his heart pounding with a mixture of elation and dread. The speed at which they traveled was breathtaking, and each time Rhaegal flapped his massive wings, Jon felt it reverberate through his entire body. He dared to peer over the side, watching the land blur beneath them. He thought of the legends of the first men, how they had once fought the others with the help of the children of the forest. Now, centuries later, a new power soared overhead. Fire would meet ice once again. They arrived in the north by the second day of flight, making camp near the last hearth, the seat of House Umber. The cold wind greeted them like a knife. Snow swirled around them, and they soon found themselves bundling up in furs. But the dragons, larger than any living creature these parts had ever known, seemed unfazed by the chill. Their breath melted snow in vast circles around them, steam rising where their hot bodies touched the frosty ground. The Umbers had survived near the frontier of the Wall for generations, known for their hardiness. But even they stared wide-eyed at the monstrous beasts that landed outside their gates. Young Ned Umber, Lord of the Last Hearth, came forward trembling but bowed deeply before Daenerys. He had heard the tales, but even the wildest stories fell short of the reality. Jon reassured him, "These dragons are on our side. They are here to protect the realm. We must see how close the enemy is. We'll only camp here for a night before we continue north." Ned Umber offered what hospitality he could: fresh game, mead, salted fish. The Dothraki huddled around great bonfires, uncertain of this frozen land but eager for glory. The Unsullied stood guard in silent discipline, keeping watch in every direction. That evening, Daenerys sat near a roaring fire with Jon, Davos, and a few of her advisors. The chill seemed determined to pierce even the thickest cloak. But when Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion came to rest nearby, the heat radiating from their bodies was enough to stave off frostbite for yards around. Jon spoke quietly with Daenerys, so only she could hear. "When I came here last, we had no hope of an alliance strong enough to fight the dead. I'm still not sure if your dragons alone can save us, but it's more hope than we've ever had before." Daenerys regarded him thoughtfully. "My dragons are more than mere beasts of war," she said. "They are fire incarnate. Fire is life in the midst of this cold. I believe in their strength, Jon. More importantly, I believe in ours. Together." She took his hand, and for a moment, the harshness of the wind and the darkness of the encroaching night paled in the light of that shared warmth. Davos coughed softly, stepping closer. "Your Grace, there's news from beyond the wall." Some rangers returned, speaking of an enormous gathering of whites near the eastern foothills. Possibly tens of thousands of them if their reports are true. The Night King might be with them. Jon's expression turned grave, but Daenerys merely lifted her chin. Let them run, she said. We've broken their vanguard and forced them to pull back. That's more than anyone's managed before. But to follow them blindly into the north is too dangerous. She guided Drogon higher, scanning the horizon for any sign of ambush. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked her, their immense wings stirring cyclones of snow. Below, the scattered remains of the undead forces shuffled away. Jon gazed after them, exhaling frost. The victory, though incomplete, was a powerful statement. The dead had not stood a chance against dragons grown monstrous. They regrouped at last, hearts still pounding with the realization of what they'd accomplished. Never before had the White Walkers been repelled with such ferocity. Whispers spread among the Northmen that the dragons were truly invincible, that not even the Night King's icy spears could pierce their obsidian scales. Confidence, a rare commodity in these dark times, began to blossom. Daenerys felt it as well. The unstoppable might of her children pulsed in her veins. While she knew the Night King would not surrender so easily, dark sorcery had a way of lingering. She felt surer than ever that the living could triumph. Jon watched her with quiet admiration. He too had faced the dead and come away emboldened. Morning brought new tidings, confirming that the undead host had retreated deeper into the winter wastes. Daenerys chose to pursue. With unstoppable flame at their command, they would not let the dead regroup. She led her dragons farther north, accompanied by a smaller retinue of Dothraki and Unsullied who rode in sleighs and wagons adapted for the frigid terrain. Jon remained beside her, their bond strengthened by the shared purpose of defending the realm. They pressed on for days, forging through blizzards and frozen rivers. Often they took to the skies to scout ahead, the dragons' roars echoing off silent peaks. Wherever they found pockets of whites, they obliterated them with merciless efficiency. Fire lit up the snowy nights, turning the dark skies into blazing dawn. The army of the dead, once a creeping, unstoppable terror, seemed to stand no chance against dragons that dwarfed even ancient legends. Yet Daenerys did not grow complacent. She understood well the cunning of her enemies. The Night King, if he still walked, would not be idle. She kept her forces vigilant, ordering watchtowers constructed at key points, manned by archers with dragon-glass arrows. Communication with Winterfell and the Last Hearth was constant via ravens. She wanted no surprises. At Winterfell, Tyrion oversaw the logistics of feeding so many soldiers, while Sansa Stark managed supplies and the day-to-day governance of the North. The news that the dragons were felling the dead at will caused morale to soar, but some worried that the deeper the living army ventured into the polar wastes, the more vulnerable they might become to hidden traps or ambushes. Still, each new raven reported victories. No dragons had fallen. Hardly any men had either, for the whites were incinerated en masse before they could mount a proper attack. In time, their hunt for the last remnants of the Night King's legion led them to a vast frozen lake, ringed by jagged peaks. Signs of the dead were everywhere. Footprints, shattered remnants of ice lances, the husks of slaughtered polar bears raised into unholy life. Daenerys ordered Drogon to circle low, scanning for movement. But all was silent, a hush broken only by the dragon's wing beats. Then, from beneath the ice, a rumbling shook the lake. Cracks spiderwebbed across the frozen surface. Before Daenerys could react, an army of whites erupted from the depths, having hidden themselves in a submerged cavern. Their eyes glowed pale in the gloom. It was a cunning ambush, though ill-fated. Drogon loosed a roar that shook the mountains, and Rhaegal and Viserion answered. Even as the whites crawled onto the ice, flames rained down. Steam billowed into the air, and the ice began to melt under the dragon's heat. Undead screeched, their bones and rotting flesh consumed. The dragons circled overhead, turning the lake's surface into a charred, slushy mess of half-submerged whites and blackened ice flows. Daenerys pressed her advantage, ordering the Dothraki archers to fire dragonglass-tipped arrows from the back of Viserion. Each arrow found its mark, shattering whites into piles of brittle bone. Jon, astride Rhaegal, guided his dragon to the far end of the lake, where he spotted several White Walkers watching the carnage. Their expressions were blank, but a sense of unease rippled through them at the sight of the unstoppable onslaught. One of the White Walkers hurled an ice spear at Rhaegal's throat, but it shattered harmlessly upon impact. Rhaegal responded with a fury of flame, incinerating the White Walker where it stood. The others fled, disappearing into swirling mists. The rest of the undead were scattered, fallen, or consumed by the lake's frigid waters once the ice broke under the dragon's wrath. Daenerys and Jon landed upon a raised embankment of ice, scanning for any sign of the Night King. He did not appear. If he had been there, he had escaped. But the dragons had won another resounding victory. The army of the dead was now reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Daenerys felt an almost heady exhilaration. This was the power of dragons. This was her birthright, and her destiny fulfilled. When they returned to Winterfell, cheers erupted from the gathered crowds. Victorious horns blared from the ramparts. The dragons, caked in icy frost that melted into rivulets under their own heat, roared back. Daenerys dismounted gracefully, greeting Tyrion, Sansa, and Arya. Jon followed, though less elegantly, still getting used to guiding Rhaegal. Tyrion's face lit with a rare, genuine smile. Word has spread quickly. Said the army of the dead is on the brink of total collapse. I never dreamed we could win so swiftly. Daenerys nodded. The dragons have exceeded all expectations. Still, let us not forget, unless we destroy the Night King himself, his threat remains. Sansa inclined her head in agreement. We must finish this once and for all. The North has suffered too long under the shadow of the dead. Preparations were made for one final thrust beyond the wall, a decisive campaign. Jon Snow joined Daenerys in a war council along with Davos, Missandei, Grey Worm, and a handful of other leaders. They planned to march through the largest known pass in the wall, using newly constructed gates that had been reinforced with dragon glass-laced metal. The dragons would fly overhead, scouting and striking at any sign of the Night King. In the weeks that followed, the combined forces of the living pressed north like an inexorable tide. They established forward camps, pushing the Whites into increasingly desperate retreats. The cunning illusions and ice traps of the White Walkers lost much of their potency against creatures who could fly over them and unleash flame from above. Eventually, the confrontation they had long awaited came to pass. On a plateau high in the Frostfangs, the Night King assembled the last of his legion, white giants, pale spiders, and an elite cadre of White Walkers. The living armies formed ranks at the base of the cliffs. Daenerys soared in on Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion close behind, all three roaring so thunderously that avalanches tumbled in the distance. The battle began swiftly. The White Walkers cast their spears of ice, but to no avail. The dragons, bigger than any in recorded history, shrugged off the attacks. The Whites, no matter how fearsome their numbers, turned to ash beneath torrents of dragon fire. Giants that once might have posed a grave threat collapsed, scorched and broken. Pale spiders cracked and crumbled under the intensity of the flames. Then the Night King himself stepped forth. Daenerys spied him from the sky, tall and gaunt, crowned in ice, astride a skeletal horse whose hooves left no prints. He raised a twisted spear that glowed with eerie magic. Daenerys felt a chill coil around her heart. She recalled the tales of how the Night King could raise the dead with a gesture, how he could freeze entire lakes solid. But Drogon roared, and that fear melted into resolve. She swooped down, unleashing a deluge of flame. A vast swath of the plateau lit up in brilliant orange, the snow evaporating in an instant. White Walkers screamed, disintegrating in the inferno. The Night King hurled his spear upward with supernatural speed. It struck Drogon's chest in a burst of icy mist. For a terrible heartbeat, Daenerys held her breath. But the spear only shattered upon the dragon's hide, leaving not even a scratch. Emboldened, Drogon dove lower. The Night King retreated, calling upon the Whites to form a protective barrier. Fire consumed them in waves. Rhaegal and Viserion joined the assault, cutting off escape routes with arcs of flame. The plateau became a hell's cape of smoke and flame, with sheets of melting ice turning to water, then steaming away to nothing. Jon Snow, leading a contingent of Northmen and Unsullied, charged up a narrow pass to flank the undead. The Whites put up a fierce struggle, but dragonglass-tipped spears and swords took a heavy toll and the living forces advanced steadily. Above, the dragons ensured that any clusters of resistance were swiftly incinerated. The unstoppable scions of House Targaryen dominated sky and ground alike. The Night King, cornered, summoned a last surge of magic. A vicious storm sprang forth, swirling winds that threatened to blind the dragons with ice and snow. But Drogon powered through, guided by Daenerys' will. She felt the crackle of sorcery against her skin, yet Drogon's inner fire prevailed, carving a path through the swirling blizzard. One final time, she spurred Drogon into a steep dive, aiming directly for the Night King. Flames poured forth in a flood so intense that the ground beneath them cracked from the heat. The White Walker Lord tried to shield himself behind a wall of ice, but it melted instantly. Ice turned to water, water to steam. The Night King staggered, his frost crown fading as the fire stripped away his unearthly powers. Daenerys shouted Dracarys, and Drogon roared, bathing the Night King in the purest fury of dragon flame. The undead ruler's pale flesh blackened, ice crown shattering until he dissolved into drifting ashes that scattered on the wind. At that moment, a keening wail reverberated across the plateau, echoing through the mountain peaks. Every remaining wight crumbled to the ground. The White Walkers, bereft of their king, dissolved into mist. A hush descended on the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of dying flames. The living forces stood in stunned silence. Then, as the enormity of their victory sank in, a roar of triumph rang out. Shouts of jubilation, tears of relief. Jon Snow exhaled, lowering his sword. Davos embraced a nearby soldier. The Dothraki bellowed victory cries. The Unsullied stood tall, proud in their disciplined silence. Above them all, the dragons circled, roaring in exultation. No longer was there any doubt the Night King was gone, his army of the dead obliterated. Westeros was free from the threat of eternal winter, and not a single dragon had fallen. Word spread like wildfire across the realm. From Winterfell to Dorne, from the Iron Islands to the Vale, the people hailed Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, as the savior of the living. Her dragons had proven beyond any doubt that they were mightier than even the greatest legends, larger, stronger, their hides impenetrable to mortal weapons and the dark sorcery of the others. The realm breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing the dead would never again march upon living soil. And yet one threat remained in the south, Cersei Lannister, who still held the Iron Throne in King's Landing. She had refused to send troops north, choosing instead to stockpile resources, scorpions, and cunning plans to destroy Daenerys' dragons. But now, hearing that the Night King was defeated, she braced for what might come next. Euron Greyjoy, who had boasted he would kill a dragon, paced restlessly in the Red Keep's throne room. Qyburn lurked at the edges, his mind filled with forbidden experiments. Cersei sat on the Iron Throne, chin high, her expression cold. She knew Daenerys would soon turn her unstoppable might toward King's Landing. "She'll come," Cersei murmured, fingers drumming on the throne's armrest. "And when she does, we must be ready. If we can't kill her dragons, we'll kill her." Euron smirked, though unease gleamed in his eyes. "My fleet stands ready. I've weapons enough to You have nothing that can wound them," Qyburn interjected softly. "Reports from the north say the Night King himself failed to pierce their hides. My scorpions won't suffice. The creatures are too large, their scales too thick." Cersei glared at him. "Then find a way, Qyburn. I will not surrender my throne." But Qyburn's silence spoke volumes. Euron's confidence faltered. Whispers in the Red Keep told of how the dragons shrugged off spears of ice, how even the greatest scorpion bolts bounced off their scales. It seemed there was no mortal weapon left to try. When Daenerys led her victorious armies south, she did so with a host emboldened by their triumph against the dead. Northmen marched alongside Dothraki screamers and unsullied phalanxes. Allied lords from the Reach and the Riverlands pledged their swords, eager to be on the winning side. High above them, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion soared, their presence alone striking terror into any who contemplated resistance. Outside the walls of King's Landing, Daenerys' forces gathered in overwhelming numbers. The city's defenders peered from the battlements, hearts gripped by dread. They had seen what happened at the Field of Fire, at the Gold Road, in the War of the Five Kings. Now, an even more awesome power approached, unstoppable as a force of nature. Cersei marshaled her scorpions along the battlements, her archers poised. But she knew in her heart that it was a futile display. Euron Greyjoy stationed his fleet near the Blackwater Bay, scorpions mounted on the decks of his largest war galleys. Yet as Daenerys approached on Drogon, flanked by her other children, the first volley of scorpion bolts was loosed. Most missed entirely. One or two found their mark and shattered on impact. The dragons screeched but emerged unharmed, the broken shafts clattering into the sea. Panic overtook the Iron Fleet. Men rushed about, reloading scorpions only to witness entire ships igniting as Drogon passed overhead, bathing them in flame. Euron narrowly escaped on a small longboat, cursing as he fled the carnage. In moments, the bay was a floating pyre. At the city gates, Daenerys landed Drogon with a deafening thud. Her armies parted to let her pass, and the gates swung open as defenders threw down their weapons. They wanted no part of this doomed stand. The Lannister soldiers, too, saw the futility of resisting. Many laid down their swords, hoping for mercy. Cersei, watching from the Red Keep, realized her city was gone. The Unstoppable had come to claim her throne. She fled to the throne room where she intended to make a last stand. Qyburn followed, trembling. She glared at the doors, expecting Daenerys to burst through with dragons in tow. Instead, the doors opened and Grey Worm led a column of Unsullied inside, their spears raised. Daenerys entered soon after, head held high, regal in her bearing. Behind her came Jon Snow, Tyrion Lannister, and several northern lords. No dragon physically squeezed into the hall, they were far too large, but Drogon's thunderous roars outside reminded everyone of his presence. The flickering fires in the braziers cast ominous shadows on the walls. Cersei stood by the Iron Throne, refusing to kneel. Her eyes flicked to Qyburn, who offered no help. She clenched her jaw and raised her chin. "You claim the throne by right of conquest? So did my father's fathers, and I made it mine through cunning. Why should I yield to you?" Daenerys' voice was cool. "Because your city has surrendered. Your fleet burns in the bay. Your soldiers throw down their arms. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, who saved the realm from the long night. I have no desire to slaughter innocents." She gestured sharply, and Grey Worm stepped forward, forcing Cersei to step away from the throne. "Surrender the crown, or I will take it by fire." Cersei glared, her lips trembling with rage. But her eyes flicked to the open windows, where the silhouette of Drogon was visible, enormous wings beating the air. She knew, at last, that there was no cunning scheme left. No scorpion, no secret wildfire caches could save her from dragons that might shrug off even the greatest blasts. Reluctantly, she let her hand slip from the pommel of a hidden dagger. "I surrender," she spat, voice laced with bitterness. "Take your throne." The great hall echoed with her words. Tyrion let out a breath he had not realized he'd been holding. Jon watched quietly, uncertain whether he felt pity or satisfaction. Daenerys ascended the steps, eyes locked on the Iron Throne that once belonged to her father. She paused, remembering the madness that had consumed King Aerys, recalling Viserys' cruel obsession. Then, with quiet determination, she seated herself upon the metal seat. A hush fell over the hall. In that moment, the bells of King's Landing began to ring, a signal of surrender. Daenerys was queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Her dragons reigned supreme in the skies, unchallenged and unchallengeable. In the following days, Daenerys worked to restore order. She spared Cersei's life, choosing instead to exile her to a distant castle under guard, mindful that executing her might spark further unrest among the Lannisters. Euron vanished into the seas, his fleet all but destroyed. The city's defenses were dismantled, and food supplies were redistributed to the starving populace. Tyrion oversaw the transitions of power, ensuring that loyal lords took positions of governance. Jon Snow remained close to Daenerys, acting as a bridge between the North and the Iron Throne. Peace, tentative and new, began to settle over Westeros. Above all, the dragons stood as living symbols of Daenerys' rule. They perched upon the towers of the Red Keep, visible from every corner of King's Landing. When they flew above the city, their shadows moved like clouds, and people looked up in awe rather than terror. At least once they realized the Queen did not intend to raise the city. All attempts to measure their size ended in astonishment. Were they truly bigger than Balerion the Dread? The consensus was yes. Balerion's monstrous skull in the crypts of the Red Keep seemed diminutive compared to Drogon's living maw. As the weeks turned to months, Daenerys focused on reconstruction. Winter had arrived across the continent, but with the White Walkers gone, it felt like a kinder season. Harvests in the Reach would feed the war-weary population. The North began to rebuild, grateful that they would no longer face the undead. Dothraki, once only known for raiding and pillaging, settled in the gift of promised lands, enthralled by the new sense of belonging. The Unsullied guarded crucial roads and ports, ensuring peace took root. House after house bent the knee, recognizing the futility of resistance. And in those rare instances where rebellious lords attempted to conspire against the crown, they found themselves confronted by the sight of 3 dragons descending on their keeps, an end to any thoughts of insurrection. For who could stand against living mountains of fire? Daenerys herself remained vigilant, She remembered how quickly rulers could be toppled, how cunning and treachery lurked in every court. Yet she also felt a stirring of hope. She intended to break the wheel to usher in a fairer realm. Already she had abolished brutal practices and instituted council to represent the common folk. Slowly but surely, the scars of war began to heal. Children in flea-bottom fashioned crude dragon toys, playing in the gutters while shrieking make-believe roars. Poets composed verses praising the winged saviors who banished the long night. Many believed the dragons were favored by the gods, returned to herald a new golden age. Even in the hall of the citadel, archmasters scratched their heads, unsure how 3 mere eggs had produced creatures so colossal and impervious. On certain evenings, Daenerys took solitary walks along the Red Keep's ramparts. She would gaze upon the sprawl of King's Landing, the domes and towers, the winding streets, the people who had once feared her father. She felt the warmth of Drogon's breath as he perched near her, as if standing guard. Sometimes she ran her hand along his scales, marveling at their thickness, their texture like unbreakable onyx. Jon would often join her. They spoke of the future, of how the North would retain its honor and identity even under Targaryen rule. They shared stories of old battles, of ghosts that haunted them both. The quiet understanding grew between them, forged in Dragonfire and the frozen wastes beyond the Wall. Meanwhile, far away in Essos, the news of these unstoppable dragons spread. Some called it a miracle, others a threat. But no one dared raise a sword or speak of invasion. The free cities had seen what Dragonfire could do, and these dragons were beyond reckoning. Merchants instead brought offers of trade, seeking to profit from stability rather than challenge it. The memory of the Night King and the army of the dead began to fade in the collective consciousness, replaced by the spectacle of Daenerys' dragons soaring overhead. Yet those who had stood on that frozen battlefield would never forget how close the realm had come to an endless winter, nor how those towering beasts had turned the tide. Fire had triumphed over ice, and no mortal had been able to snuff out that flame. Thus, the 7 kingdoms entered an era of relative peace and unity under Queen Daenerys Targaryen. While human hearts could still harbor envy and greed, none possessed the means to harm her dragons. Their hides were too thick for the largest ballista or the hardest steel. Their fiery breath made a mockery of any army brave or foolish enough to stand against them. And so it was that no dragons died in the conflicts that followed. They reigned unchallenged, guardians of the skies, symbols of a queen's power tempered by mercy. Years passed and songs were written of Daenerys' reign. Minstrels sang of her kindness in victory and her unwavering resolve in battle, of how her dragons eclipsed even Balerion the Dread in size and might. Children recited stories of the Night King's defeat and how his icy spears shattered upon dragon scales as if they were mere twigs. In the streets, storytellers declared that the gods themselves must have crafted these dragons for a single purpose, to save the world from the darkness of eternal night. In time, the realm stabilized. Grain shipments arrived in King's Landing. The roads were safer than they had been in generations, as even bandits dared not test the Dragon Queen's wrath. Former enemies swore loyalty or else quietly disappeared into exile. The people, weary of endless war, found solace in the knowledge that no foreign invader or supernatural terror could breach their borders as long as the dragons soared overhead. Occasionally, Daenerys would fly north, revisiting Winterfell to confer with Sansa, Arya, Bran, and others who had become an extended family. She and Jon would look out across the frosty landscape, recalling the horrors they had faced. Each time, the dragons cast enormous shadows on the snow, a reminder that the threat of winter's doom had been vanquished. No White Walker would ever again set foot in the land of the living. Other times, Daenerys journeyed to the Stormlands or the Reach, ensuring those regions thrived. She presided over feasts with the Tyrell heirs, forging bonds of friendship. She consulted with the lords of the Westerlands, ensuring their lands recovered from the tumultuous wars of the past decade. Every stop, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion perched on nearby hills, scaring local wildlife and inspiring awe among peasants who crowded roads just to catch a glimpse of the living legends. Throughout these travels, Euron Greyjoy remained a ghostly menace at sea. He resurged once or twice with a battered remainder of his fleet, attempting to pillage coastal towns. But each time word reached Daenerys, her dragons arrived within days, burning ships and scattering pirates. Euron's name became more of a curse than a threat. Finally, he vanished altogether, perhaps claimed by the merciless waves. As the realm adapted to this new balance of power, Daenerys continued to refine her rule. She appointed wise advisors, many of whom represented diverse regions and beliefs. She took steps to lessen the grip of old feudal structures, granting more rights to small folk and encouraging the flow of knowledge from the citadel to every corner of the continent. Some changes took root slowly, resisted by old lords set in their ways, but none openly rebelled. Not with dragons overhead. In King's Landing, life flourished once again. The markets bustled with goods from distant shores. Streets were cleaned, new aqueducts built, and the once filthy air grew clearer, though not perfect. The threat of war receded so profoundly that people dared to speak of a golden age. There was still crime, still intrigue, some things never changed, but it was overshadowed by a sense of relief that the realm had avoided both the long night and total devastation by endless civil strife. And there, in the Red Keep, Daenerys would wake in the early morning hours to the resonant calls of her dragons. She would walk onto her balcony and see Drogon perched on a neighboring spire, gazing out at the sunrise over Blackwater Bay. His obsidian wings, broader than any ship's sails, would unfurl in the gentle breeze. Rhaegal and Viserion might be circling the city, watchful and serene. No arrow, no spear, no cunning device had ever harmed them. They were truly invincible, living testaments to the Targaryen motto, fire and blood. And yet Daenerys hoped to transcend that motto. She had used fire, yes, but sparingly, reluctant to become a tyrant like her father. Blood had been spilled, but she sought to end the cycle of endless revenge. If the dragons were unstoppable, perhaps they could enforce a just peace rather than brutal subjugation. That was her dream, a realm guarded by dragons so that people might live without fear. Time would tell if that dream would hold. For now, the realm was at rest. The White Walkers were no more. Cersei was deposed. Euron's fleet had burned. The unstoppable dragons soared across the skies of Westeros, and Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, sat upon the Iron Throne, guiding her people as best she could. Sometimes old lords with memories of the prior Targaryen reign murmured about the rise of a new dynasty, one that might last 1,000 years. Others said that dragons of such size would eventually grow weary, that the land could not feed them forever. But for now, there was plenty of livestock. The queen's fleets brought fish from the seas, caravans from inland carried sheep and cattle, and every sunrise saw the dragons feasting contentedly. They never stopped growing, or so the rumors said, and soon they might rival entire castles en masse. But the realm did not protest. Better to feed 3 hungry dragons that protected them all than to be left defenseless against a new threat. With each passing day, the notion of White Walkers or foreign invaders conjured less fear, so long as the dragons soared overhead. In the end, that was the legacy Daenerys forged, a kingdom where the nightmares of ice and the horrors of war were kept at bay by creatures more powerful than any living memory. A kingdom where no dragon died because none could kill them. A kingdom where the scars of the past were beginning, at last, to heal. And so it was that the story of Daenerys Targaryen's dragons, grown larger than even Balerion the Dread, became the stuff of myth and wonder. Minstrels would sing of how they shielded the realm from the long night, how their mother united the kingdoms in peace. People told each other that so long as those dragons lived, no army of ice or iron could threaten the 7 kingdoms. Children born under Daenerys's reign grew up looking skyward, expecting to see dragons pass overhead, a normal part of everyday life, living guardians that no power on earth could stand against. Late at night, the queen sometimes reminisced about her early struggles. She recalled being a timid girl sold in marriage, helpless and vulnerable. She smiled, thinking of how she had birthed her dragons from lifeless eggs, forging an unbreakable bond. Now they were unstoppable, a testament to her own unyielding spirit and the destiny that had led her across continents. She would walk out to the courtyard, where Drogon often slept curled around the base of a towering statue. She would press her palm against his flank, feeling the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his breath. Rhaegal and Viserion would rustle their wings in their own corners of the keep, content in the knowledge that they were safe. The queen they loved, if dragons could love, was by their side, and no one, not even the gods, could threaten that bond. Dawn would break over King's Landing, painting the city in shades of gold and pink. The dragons would stir, hungry, ready for another day of soaring over fields and rivers, feasting upon cattle or fish delivered by loyal stewards. The people would look up, reminded of their queen's watchful presence. And Daenerys, gazing from her balcony, would feel a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had fulfilled her promise to break the chains, to protect the living, and to usher in a time of hope. For a final time, she might recall the image of the Night King hurling his spear, how it shattered upon Drogon's scales, and how that moment changed everything. The unstoppable had met the unthinkable and emerged victorious. Nothing, not the cunning of Euron Greyjoy, not the cold magic of the White Walkers, not the largest scorpion bolts ever forged, had been able to slay a single one of her dragons. And thus, the future lay open, shaped by the fiery grace of dragons too mighty to fall, guided by a queen who had learned mercy and strength in equal measure. Westeros, fragile and war-torn, found at last a semblance of peace beneath those towering wings. No dragons died, and the realm for once might truly live. Daenerys Targaryen awoke to the soft light of dawn spilling through the tall windows of her chambers in the Red Keep. For a moment, before memory rushed in, she felt only the haze of sleep. Then came the slow, steady rush of realization. She was queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and even more incredible, her dragons soared through the skies above King's Landing with not a single foe left to challenge their existence. Their victory over the Night King's legions remained fresh in her mind, as did her triumph over Cersei. She had spared the city, toppled the last Lannister monarch, and taken her rightful seat upon the Iron Throne. She rose from bed and stepped onto the narrow balcony overlooking the sprawling capital. Pale sunlight glinted on the red-tiled roofs, and she could already hear the bustling commerce stirring in the lower levels of the city. Far above the highest towers, three black silhouettes circled in lazy arcs: Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Even from here, Daenerys could sense their presence like a physical warmth in her chest. She had grown used to that strange awareness, an unspoken bond forged back when she had watched them hatch from eggs she placed on her own husband's funeral pyre. How small they had been then, fragile and wondrous. Now they were mighty beyond anything the world had known since the dawn of days, unstoppable in the face of mortal or undead adversaries alike. As she watched them, one of the dragons, Drogon, drew closer, gliding on a current of wind. He let out a muted roar, a mere echo of the thunderous cries that had shaken armies. The city below shivered with both reverence and a measure of apprehension, for dragons, however beloved, were still harbingers of unimaginable power. Daenerys allowed herself a small, proud smile. Drogon's black wings shimmered as he soared past, almost brushing the Red Keep's highest turret with his tail. She heard distant cheers and gasps from onlookers in the streets. Many still found it difficult to believe that these creatures, once extinct, were alive, healthy, and now nearly the size of entire war galleys. She dressed in the practical leathers and furs she had grown used to while campaigning in the north, though her queenship demanded more formal attire in official appearances. She intended to walk the city incognito this day, accompanied only by a few trusted guards. Slipping into that role of the watchful ruler, observing her people up close, had become a habit of hers since taking King's Landing. She had no wish to be sealed away behind a fortress of courtiers ignorant of her subjects' struggles. Moments later, she stepped into the hallway and found Grey Worm waiting with quiet patience. Missandei was there as well, poised and serene. "Your Grace," Missandei said, bowing her head. "The city is waking. Several matters await your attention. The High Septon has requested an audience to discuss repairs to the Great September. And there is a delegation from Pentos seeking your leave to import more goods without increased tariffs." Daenerys sighed softly. "All in due time. Walk with me, Missandei. We'll speak on these matters as we go." She glanced at Grey Worm. "We won't need a large escort. 6 guards will do." Grey Worm inclined his head, silent but attentive. Though the Unsullied had little to fear now that the wars were over, he was never complacent. He had, after all, seen how swiftly chaos could erupt even under a dragon queen. They made their way through the Red Keep's winding corridors, descending stairs polished by centuries of royal footsteps. Everywhere Daenerys looked, there were reminders of Targaryen history. She passed tapestries depicting Aegon's conquest, images of Balerion the Dread, Meraxes, and Vagor-breathing fire upon Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. She paused once to study a panel showing Balerion, wings spread wide over a burning keep. Once she had assumed nothing could surpass that monstrous dragon of old. Now she understood that Drogon was larger still, and Rhaegal and Viserion not far behind. They continued outside, stepping into the early morning air. Sellsword's turned gold cloaks patrolled the grounds, newly sworn to Queen Daenerys. The people who had once worn Lannister colors now bore her sigil, the 3-headed dragon in black and red. Some gave cautious bows. Others offered warm smiles. There was a feeling of cautious optimism in King's Landing, an energy that pulsed through the cobblestone streets. Daenerys and her small entourage slipped into the city proper. They skirted the edges of the major thoroughfares, making their way toward Flea Bottom. Soldiers parted to let her pass, and soon she was moving amidst ordinary folk, many still rubbing the sleep from their eyes, gathering at stalls for fresh bread or salted fish. The smells of cooking oil, onions, and toasting barley drifted through the air. Missandei kept her voice low as she relayed the day's concerns. The city's builders believe it may take another year to fully rebuild the poorer districts damaged by the last war. Food stores from the Reach are arriving regularly now, but distribution remains patchy. The people have enough to survive, but we will need to ensure fairness. Daenerys nodded. She had not forgotten that her father's mania and her brother's arrogance had once turned the realm against House Targaryen. If she was truly to break the cycle, she needed more than dragons and a crown, she needed the people's trust. Continue gathering a council of representatives from each district, she said. Let them bring their grievances directly to me. If necessary, we'll reduce taxes on grain to make sure no one starves. She paused at a bakery's open window where a boy of perhaps 10 years was helping his father knead dough. Seeing his queen, the father bowed hastily, flour dusting his apron. The boy stared wide-eyed, mesmerized by her braided silver hair and regal bearing. Daenerys offered a gentle smile. It smells wonderful, she said. Thank you for your hard work feeding the city. The man nearly dropped his dough in surprise at her acknowledgement, and she moved on before he could stammer out more than a quick thanks. Everywhere she walked, she noticed how conversations hushed or turned excited in her presence. Some believed her a living goddess, or at least close to it. They whispered that her dragons could melt entire armies and had protected the people from the undead. Others remembered the terror of dragon fire in previous wars and watched her warily. Over time, she hoped to show them that her rule was not one of cruelty. If the realm was to know lasting peace, it would happen through empathy, not just intimidation. She passed clusters of street performers, traveling mummers, and peddlers hawking their wares. A gathering of children chased each other through an alley, wooden dragon effigies clutched in their hands, swirling them through the air with joyous shrieks. The swirl of city life felt vibrant and alive, so different from the war-torn landscapes she had traversed in the north. When she reached the edge of Flea Bottom, the narrow, twisting alleys reminded her of the warrens she had seen in Essos. The buildings pressed close, overshadowing the streets so that dawn's light barely crept in. Yet these people, too, recognized her. Murmured greetings, cautious bows, and grateful nods emerged from every corner. Flea Bottom had endured the reign of the Mad King, the cruelty of Joffrey, and the chaos of the wars that followed. If they found hope in Daenerys, it was because they had seen her feed the poor and free the enslaved across the sea. And, of course, they had witnessed her unstoppable dragons that shielded them from the undead threat that once loomed. She took the chance to step into a makeshift hospital run by a group of novices from the faith. A handful of wounded men rested on straw pallets, some missing limbs from the final battle with the Lannisters, others bearing scars from the skirmishes with Euron's pirates near the Blackwater. Healers darted about with bandages and wooden bowls of broth. Daenerys spoke briefly to each patient, offering a measure of comfort. Some were starstruck, others too weary to do more than nod. She could sense their uncertainty. Would her rule improve their lot, or was it all just another phase in the cycle of kings and queens? The unstoppable dragons meant little if their daily struggles remained unchanged. At length, Missandei stepped closer, politely drawing Daenerys away. "Your Grace," she said, "pardon me, but the sun is high already. You have the High Septon awaiting you at the Red Keep." Daenerys nodded. "Of course. Let's go." They made their way back through the winding streets, collecting more unsullied along the way until they returned to the castle. Passing beneath the portcullis, Daenerys took a final glance toward the sky. Drogon still soared on the horizon, Regal and Viserion alongside him. In the bright morning sun, they looked like living constellations, shining black, green, and pale gold. She felt an echo of pride and relief that no foe had emerged capable of harming them. Even the icy spears of the Night King had failed. Back in the throne room, Daenerys seated herself upon the Iron Throne, recalling the swirl of events that had led her here. Tyrion Lannister stood to one side, flanked by Davos Seaworth. Jon Snow was absent. He had taken a small retinue north to Winterfell to see to matters there, and she felt his absence like a dull ache in her chest. Nonetheless, duty beckoned. The High Septon approached, draped in layered robes, flanked by silent sisters. He spoke at length about the Great September's reconstruction. It had once been obliterated by wildfire under Cersei's rule. Now, the faith sought to raise a new seat of worship that might symbolize the unity of the realm under Daenerys. She listened patiently. She had no burning love for the faith of the Seven, having grown up in exile with little formal religion, yet she recognized its importance to many of her subjects. "As long as the faith does not overstep its bounds," she said evenly, recalling how the faith militant had once terrorized the city in the time of the Sparrow Uprising, "the Crown will support rebuilding efforts." but I will not sanction the faith militant nor any armed extension of religious power. The High Septon bowed. We only seek to guide souls to the seven, Your Grace. No more. She let him drone on about funds and materials, promising a portion of the crown's coffers to aid in the construction. With the wars largely settled, the royal treasury was replenishing faster than expected, bolstered by trade from the Reach and taxes from across the realm. The presence of unstoppable dragons made collecting taxes far simpler. Few lords dared cheat a queen who could appear at their gates astride a winged god of flame. Next, the Pentoshi delegation entered, richly dressed merchants smelling of scented oils and exotic spices. Their leader, a man named Arzano, bowed low, presenting gifts of lacquered boxes and rare perfume. They proposed a treaty reducing import duties, claiming it would strengthen both sides. Tyrion, who understood the ways of free city trade, interjected with a soft cough and explained the complexities. Daenerys studied Arzano's face, weighing the sincerity of his words. We have no desire to break faith with Pentos, Daenerys said, but the realm has faced war after war. I will not sign an agreement that only benefits foreign merchants at the expense of my subjects. Arzano's smile never faltered. We understand, Your Grace. Perhaps a mutual compromise can be reached. Pentos can provide you with the latest in advanced shipbuilding and navigational charts, courtesy of our famed mapmakers. In return, you reduce your tariffs on certain goods, silks, dyes, and spices. Tyrion leaned in, whispering counsel in Daenerys' ear. She nodded thoughtfully. We will discuss the details further. If it proves beneficial for all, I have no objection. Thus proceeded the business of the day. A steady tide of lords, knights, merchants, and supplicants crossing the marble floor. Some pleaded for royal pardons or petitions. Others sought to curry favor with flattery and gifts. Daenerys listened with as much patience as she could muster, though the tedium of governance weighed on her. She thought of the open skies and how she once traveled freely, forging her destiny in the face of adversity. Now she was settled, a queen enthroned, but she was determined not to let the realm stagnate. When the day's audiences finally drew to a close, she slumped back in the Iron Throne with a weary sigh. Tyrion approached with a sympathetic twist of his lips. Ruling isn't as simple as war, is it? She stood, the metal of the throne scraping softly against her cloak. No, war was straightforward by comparison. Either I burned my enemies or persuaded them to yield. But this requires constant effort, constant vigilance, and a willingness to compromise. Davos joined them, rubbing his stubbled chin. Compromise might be a fine thing, Your Grace. After all, we've had enough war for a lifetime. Daenerys nodded, then paused to look at her two advisors. Still the Alm must not forget what the cost of betrayal could be. Our dragons keep us safe, yes, but also keep the peace. I'll do what I must to ensure stability without the cruelty of my father. Tyrion studied her a moment. There's something else. A raven arrived from Braavos. The Iron Bank has requested a formal meeting. They've recognized your legitimacy as queen and want to clarify the crown's debts. Do you wish to see them immediately? A flicker of annoyance crossed Daenerys' face. The Iron Bank was infamous for manipulating thrones. They had once backed Stannis Baratheon against the Lannisters, and before that they had financed countless wars. I suppose I must, she said, but not today. I'm too weary for more negotiations. Let them wait a few days and make it clear we will pay what is fair, no more. Tyrion's mouth quirked into a small grin. I'll draft a polite response. With that, Daenerys took her leave, retiring to her solar to gather her thoughts. Missandei followed quietly behind. They climbed the steps of a narrow tower that offered a view of Blackwater Bay in the distance. Daenerys opened the tall windows, letting a breeze wash over her. She spotted the silhouettes of her dragons once more, far out to sea, perhaps chasing gulls or scouting for fish. Rhaegal and Viserion often hunted together, while Drogon, the largest and most temperamental, sometimes flew alone, returning only when Daenerys beckoned. Missandei came to stand beside her. Are you worried about how long the peace will last? Daenerys considered. In part, but the realm has never known a monarch who wields such a deterrent as these dragons. Long ago, House Targaryen used dragons to forge unity through fear, and it worked for a while. But I don't want to be a queen who rules through fear alone. I want a realm that flourishes. Missandei offered a gentle smile. You have already done so much. You ended slavery in Meereen, Astapor, and Ukai. You defeated the Night King here. You spared King's Landing when you could have burned it. The people will come to see your heart, not just your dragons. That thought gave Daenerys a measure of solace. She placed her hand lightly on the windowsill. Sometimes I wonder if my father's madness stems from the same fire in my blood. I must be careful never to let that rage consume me. Missandei shook her head. You are not your father. You have proven that many times over. The queen placed a hand on Missandei's shoulder in gratitude, then turned back to the open sea. What of Jon? Have we had any more ravens from Winterfell? Yes, your grace, Missandei said, consulting a slip of parchment tucked into her belt. He's helped Sansa settle some disputes between houses Glover and Manderley over territory lines. Seems minor, but it threatened to flare into open conflict until Jon intervened. He writes that he'll return soon, perhaps within the fortnight. A lightness touched Daenerys' heart at that news. She missed Jon's steady presence, his calm amidst chaos. Their bond had been tested by revelations of his parentage, Aegon Targaryen, her nephew by blood, but they had chosen to stand together regardless, forging an alliance that had saved the entire continent from the dead. The question of succession still lingered, an unspoken tension at times, but she refused to let it divide them. In the days that followed, King's Landing settled into a rhythm of reconstruction. Craftsmen rebuilt sections of the city that had fallen into disrepair. Plans were drawn up for new roads, drainage systems, and the partial restoration of the dragon pit atop Rhaenys' Hill. Once, the dragon pit had housed the Targaryen dragons, though many believed it contributed to their eventual stunted growth in later generations. Daenerys had no intention of caging her children, but the site could serve as a sanctuary or a monument to Targaryen heritage, reminding the realm of her lineage while offering a place for her dragons to rest should they desire shelter. Meanwhile, rumors drifted in from the wider world. Dorne, restless under years of shaky alliances, debated whether to remain in the realm or try for greater autonomy. The Iron Islands were quiet, for Yara Greyjoy maintained control after Euron's flight. The Vale was firmly allied with the North, and both stood by the Queen. The Westerlands, still reeling from the downfall of the Lannisters, waited to see which bannerman would emerge as paramount. One morning, as Daenerys was finishing her breakfast of honeyed bread and fruit, Tyrion arrived with news of a disturbance. Your Grace, we have received word from the countryside south of the city. A few rebellious lords, minor bannermen once loyal to Cersei, seem to be gathering men-at-arms. They say that only a mad woman could ride beasts of destruction, and that the Targaryens will bring ruin to the realm. Daenerys set down her cup. Is it more than talk? Tyrion shrugged. Difficult to say. They might be testing your resolve, seeing if they can stir unrest. I doubt they have the numbers to pose a genuine threat. Still, if left unchecked, it could fester. Perhaps they plan sabotage, or to assassinate your representatives. She thought for a moment, recalling the chaos of the Sons of the Harpy in Meereen. Send a raven demanding they present themselves in King's Landing to answer for their words. If they refuse, we will ride out and treat them as traitors. Tyrion gave a small bow. As you wish, your grace, though it might be wise to send a light force of Unsullied as well, to show we are serious. She agreed, dispatching Grey Worm with a contingent to the region. The next day, the rebellious lords arrived at the city gates under a flag of truce, trembling under the watchful gaze of Drogon, who was perched on the red keep's battlements. Led by a petty knight named Ser Alistair Huey, they came into the throne room, eyes darting anxiously toward the queen. Before Daenerys spoke a word, Ser Alistair prostrated himself, proclaiming that they had been misled by false rumors, some nonsense about the queen's dragons devouring children and burning villages for sport. Daenerys regarded them coldly, for she had heard countless excuses before. Why spread these lies, she demanded. Were you not in King's Landing when I took the throne without burning the city? Ser Alistair blanched. Our tongues were loose, your grace. We feared you would eventually become like your father. We heard talk that monstrous dragons cannot be controlled forever. She stood, letting the hush of the hall settle around them. You fear what you do not understand. I will not become the Mad King. My dragons answer to me, and I have shown mercy to those who surrender. But should you raise arms against me in truth, you will discover that they are indeed unstoppable. Is that what you want for yourselves? For your families? For the people in your lands? They shook their heads vigorously, stammering pleas for forgiveness. Daenerys allowed Tyrion to handle the details of their submission. She would rather not waste further time on them, but she understood that stamping out the embers of rebellion early could prevent larger fires down the road. Eventually, she dismissed them with a firm warning that any future sedition would be met with dragonfire. The men left pale-faced, and word of their humiliation spread through the city in short order. Such incidents continued sporadically, but in each case, the overwhelming presence of the dragons and Daenerys' measured approach made it clear that open defiance would lead only to ruin. In truth, many of these lesser lords had little real desire for rebellion. They only tested the queen's resolve or clung to the old hatred some held for Targaryens. But each new pacification reinforced Daenerys' position. A fortnight passed, and at last, Jon Snow returned to King's Landing. Daenerys greeted him in a smaller courtyard of the Red Keep where the dragons often settled. She watched from an elevated terrace as he rode in with an honor guard of Northmen, familiar banners with the dire wolf of House Stark fluttering in the breeze. He dismounted, scanning the sky as if expecting to see a dragon swoop down. His expression softened when he spotted Daenerys coming to meet him, her silver hair glinting in the sun. She descended the steps quickly, and they embraced in full view of the courtyard. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers' acknowledgement that the bond between these two was far more than political. Daenerys pulled back to examine Jon's face, noting the lines of fatigue under his eyes. "You look weary," she said gently. "Hard travels?" He shrugged. "I've grown used to the north, but the disputes there are endless. Land, livestock, old grudges. We settled most of it. Sansa sends her regards." Daenerys nodded. "How fare the Starks?" Jon's face lit with a rare smile. "Arya roams the lands now as restless as ever. Bran remains at Winterfell, though he speaks in riddles sometimes, visions of possible futures, or so he claims. Sansa manages everything else with skill. The north prospers again thanks to harvest shipments from the south." Daenerys linked her arm through Jon's. "Come, we have much to discuss. And I suspect our dragons want to greet you as well." Sure enough, Regal soon appeared overhead, drawn by the scent of Jon's arrival. The green dragon circled once before landing in the courtyard with a gust of wind that ruffled cloaks and toppled loose crates. Jon approached carefully, remembering how to position himself near Regal's flank so as not to startle the beast. The dragon lowered his head, allowing Jon to place a hand upon his warm scales. "He remembers you," Daenerys observed, smiling. "Their memories are keen. He knows you share the blood of the dragon." Jon did not quite smile, but a flicker of wonder crossed his face. "He's grown even since I last saw him. I didn't think that possible." Daenerys laughed softly. "They never stop growing, or so the maesters say. As long as they have enough food and space to roam, they'll keep on until the day they die, if they ever do." A sudden pang caught her at the thought of losing them, but she pushed it aside. The prophecy of an ever-growing dragon, invulnerable and fierce, offered its own comfort. That evening, they dined together in Daenerys' private solar. Tyrion joined them along with Davos, Missandei, and Grey Worm. They exchanged stories of the realm's recovery efforts, of trade negotiations, and of small but persistent troubles. Jon spoke of the North's gratitude. "Most never thought to see a Targaryen queen protect them from the undead. Now they call you the Dragon of the Dawn. They say your flames drove back the long night." Daenerys lowered her gaze modestly. "I couldn't have done it alone. You united the North, Jon. And your sisters, your men, all played their part." Tyrion raised a goblet. "To unlikely alliances that saved the world." The others joined in a toast. "And to unstoppable dragons that keep it safe," he added. Davos set down his drink. Well, if your majesty doesn't mind me asking, is there any plan for a royal heir? The realm is at peace, but it's good to think of the future. You and Jon." A silence fell. Jon glanced at Daenerys, his cheeks faintly reddening. Tyrion cleared his throat, and Missandei lowered her eyes politely. Daenerys and Jon had skirted around this question for some time. Daenerys believed she was barren, at least according to the witch's curse long ago. Yet was that curse truly unbreakable? She could not be certain. At length, Daenerys answered gently, "When I was younger, I believed I could never bear children. But I will not let that fear guide our future. If the gods grant us children, so be it. If not, we can name an heir from among those we trust." She turned to Jon, her expression steady. "We have time to decide." He nodded. "The realm's safety is our first concern. Children or not, we'll face whatever comes together." The conversation moved on, but Daenerys could see the question remained in the back of everyone's mind. What would become of the realm if the unstoppable dragons outlived their mother? Would they serve a new Targaryen heir willingly, or would they become wild beasts beyond anyone's control? In any case, that was a concern for another day. Weeks slipped by and the realm's affairs continued to stabilize. Daenerys divided her time between overseeing projects in King's Landing and flying to distant regions to handle disputes, always accompanied by at least one of her dragons. She visited Riverrun, where Edmure Tully reaffirmed his loyalty, though with a certain timidity. She traveled to Highgarden, where a distant Tyrell cousin now held stewardship with the blessing of the crown. The once lush gardens were being replanted after the ravages of war. In each place, she found that the mere presence of a dragon circling overhead ended arguments before they began. People saw and understood that conflict was futile. In her quieter moments, Daenerys wrestled with the lingering desire to reshape the society more thoroughly, to bring the same ideals she had fought for in Essos, an end to oppression and a new dignity for the powerless. Yet Westeros was a land of ancient customs, and the lords would never accept too many drastic changes at once. She introduced reforms incrementally, improved rights for small folk, stricter punishments for abusive lords, incentives to free bonded servants. Tyrion guided her to remain cautious, noting how drastically the nobility might react if pushed too fast. Reluctantly, she agreed, though it pained her to temper her ambitions for a kinder realm. One evening, Daenerys sat by the fireplace in her solar, reading old histories about Aegon's conquest. She was struck by how swiftly Aegon had bent the realm to his will, forging new customs and alliances in a matter of years. Yet the Targaryens who followed struggled to maintain that unity. Dragons had died off over time, and so had the fear that kept rebellious lords in check. A cycle of war followed. She thought of her own dragons, mightier than Balerion, Merax's, and Vhagar combined. Would that guarantee a more lasting peace, or would the fear they inspired eventually lead to some new cataclysm? A soft knock sounded at the door. She bid them enter, and Jon stepped inside, shrugging out of a cloak dusted with the day's chill. He offered a small smile. "Hard at study?" She closed the book and gestured for him to sit near her by the fire. "Reading about my ancestors. Thinking about what their choices mean for ours." Jon's gaze traveled over her face. "I've been thinking too. My father, Rhaegar, he believed in prophecy, or so some say. He thought the prince that was promised would save the world from darkness. Maybe he thought that was me or himself. In the end, it was all of us, wasn't it? United by chance or fate." She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his calloused skin. "We did it together. And if the realm endures in peace, that will be our legacy. Not just some prophecy." He nodded. A comfortable silence settled. Outside, a deep roar echoed across the rooftops, signaling that one of the dragons was returning from a hunt. Their wingbeats stirred the wind around the high towers. Jon listened with a faint smile, having grown fond of that sound despite its fearful power. "Sometimes I dream of them," he said softly, "flying over mountains of ice and fields of green, unstoppable like forces of nature. In the dream, the people below aren't afraid, they're cheering." Daenerys looked into the fire. "Would that it were always so. There will always be some who fear or hate us for what we are and what we wield." He studied her a moment before resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we show them who we are by what we do, not by fire alone." Time wore on, and with it, the calm of Daenerys' reign solidified. The small folk began to trust her, or at least trust that she would not burn them alive without cause. Trade flourished. The roads grew safer. Litter by litter, ravens brought word that more houses in the Stormlands, the Reach, the Riverlands, and even the Westerlands endorsed her rule. Some lords grumbled about the new taxes or the costs of rebuilding the capital. Others worried that the Targaryen dragons might overshadow their own legacy. But none dared open rebellion. With the passing months, Daenerys turned her attention to external affairs. A summons arrived from the Prince of Dorne, who invited her to Sunspear, hoping to negotiate a closer alliance. Daenerys accepted, eager to bind Dorne into the realm wholeheartedly. She decided to travel by sea to Sunspear, bringing a small royal fleet for show. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion would follow overhead, though they could range far or fish in deeper waters as they pleased. Jon elected to remain behind in King's Landing for a time, ensuring the capital was secure. Tyrion, Davos, Missandei, and Grey Worm accompanied her, along with a complement of Unsullied. The voyage began under clear skies. As the ship sailed south along Westeros's coast, sailors looked up now and then to see the dragons soaring high, sometimes mere specks against the sun. On other occasions, the dragons descended to skim the waves, plucking large fish from the water. Villages along the shoreline erupted in excitement at their passing, though many fishermen hastily paddled to shore, not trusting these monstrous shapes overhead. At nights, the fleet anchored near sheltered coves, and Daenerys' retinue would gather on deck under the stars. The dragons often curled up on wide beaches or rocky outcroppings, their immense forms glowing in the moonlight. Tyrion would sip wine and regale them with droll stories while Davos commented on the best new trade routes. Missandei quietly translated some of the old Naathi folk tales for Daenerys. The warm southern breeze grew stronger as they approached Dorne, carrying scents of salt and desert spice. Sunspear's slender towers rose from the coastline. The city was smaller than King's Landing but no less proud, built to withstand the harsh Dornish climate. As Daenerys's fleet docked, Prince Corin Martell awaited them with banners flapping in the hot wind. He offered a respectful bow. A swirl of bright, airy garments filled the docks, and curious onlookers gaped at the dragons circling above. Daenerys stepped onto the quay, shoulders squared. Despite the heat, she wore a light cloak embroidered with the Targaryen sigil. Prince Corin welcomed her warmly and escorted the royal party into the cooling shade of Sunspear's palace. There, the walls were painted in vibrant colors depicting Dornish victories over previous Targaryen attempts to subjugate them. Daenerys noted the subtle messages of defiance. Dorne had never fully bowed, not even to Aegon. Times had changed, though, and these Martells seemed inclined to ally with her. Over chilled wine and platters of spiced dates, they spoke of forging a lasting bond between the crown and Dorne. Corin offered glimpses of a new era, trade routes across the deserts, the potential for a more robust southern navy. In return, he desired greater autonomy for Dornish laws and traditions. Daenerys listened carefully, aware of Dorne's long history of independence and fierce pride. She was willing to negotiate so long as the unity of the Seven Kingdoms remained intact. It was near twilight when a piercing roar cut through the conversation. All eyes turned skyward in alarm. From the open palace balcony, they saw Drogon, a black shape blotting out the clouds, descending toward the city's outskirts. Flickers of flame licked from his maw. For a heartbeat, panic seized the courtyard. Had something angered the Dra? Gone? Had a fool tried to strike him? Daenerys rose so swiftly she nearly upended her goblet. She crossed to the balcony and leaned over the balustrade. Rhaegal and Viserion were circling overhead, as if alarmed. Far below, the city was in uproar. People fled the streets, diving for cover. Then Daenerys spotted a plume of black smoke rising near the docks. Without hesitation, she turned to Missandei. "Stay here. Keep the negotiations calm. Prince Corin, I beg your pardon, but I must see what's happened." Corin, wide-eyed, nodded. Yes, of course." Daenerys whirled, her mind ablaze with fear for her dragon. She sprinted through the corridors out to the palace gates, where Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied fell in behind her. Tyrion struggled to keep up, face red from the sudden sprint. As they reached the wide courtyard near the docks, the scene became clear. A small ship had exploded into flames, sending debris flying across the harbor. Drogon hovered above, clearly enraged by something in the water. Citizens cowered behind market stalls, uncertain of the danger. Daenerys rushed forward. "Drogon!" she called, her voice echoing. "To me!" She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling for the bond. She sensed his agitation, the anger that roiled in his massive heart. Slowly, grudgingly, Drogon flapped his colossal wings and settled on a stretch of open sand near the burning wreck. Smoke billowed, and the heat was intense, but nothing compared to the fire that lived within the dragon. Soldiers rushed to extinguish the flames, shouting commands as they formed bucket lines from the sea. Daenerys approached Drogon cautiously. She could see splinters of wood, twisted metal, and scattered cargo strewn across the docks. The stench of sulfur and something else hung in the air. Tyrion arrived, panting, then recoiled at the odor. What happened? A local guard emerged, coughing from the smoke. It appears a group of men were trying to smuggle wildfire canisters onto the ship, or so it seems. Something must have detonated. Daenerys' eyes narrowed. Wildfire? Here. The guard nodded shakily. Yes, Your Grace. We found some suspicious barrels hidden in the debris. If the entire cargo had gone off, half the harbor might have been destroyed. The men who handled it, well, they didn't survive. Drogon let out a low rumble, as though he could still smell the acrid tang of danger. Daenerys reached out, placing a hand on his massive foreleg. "You saved the city," she murmured, assuming he had seen or sensed the threat. Perhaps the men had attempted to set it off intentionally, or perhaps an accident triggered the blast. Either way, it seemed that these smugglers had tried to transport a substance that once brought King's Landing to ruin under Cersei's hand. Grey Worm approached with a grim set to his mouth. "We found corpses bearing tattoos of the Golden Company, Your Grace, though we believed the Golden Company in disarray after the war. It's possible these were remnants or sellswords who turned to private sabotage." Tyrion exhaled sharply. If they had unleashed that wildfire in the city gods, this could have been catastrophic. Dragons are unstoppable, but wildfire, it kills indiscriminately. You can't reason with it. Daenerys felt a tightness in her chest. So there were still conspirators who sought to undermine her rule or simply to wreak havoc. She placed a soothing hand on Drogon's scaled hide, and he lowered his head to nudge her shoulder gently. The heat of his breath washed over her. She was grateful beyond words that the incident had been contained. Night fell on Sunspear with tensions still high, but Prince Corin Martell was quick to reaffirm his loyalty. He ordered a full investigation and promised swift justice for anyone connected to the wildfire plot. Daenerys recognized that he was just as shaken by the near disaster which could have razed part of his capital. She assured him she did not blame Dorne as a whole. Yet the lesson was stark. Not even unstoppable dragons were immune to subterfuge or sabotage. The men who had died in the explosion had presumably hoped to use wildfire in some scheme, maybe to kill a dragon or provoke an inferno. If they had succeeded, countless innocent lives would have been lost. Over the next week, her unsullied and Dornish soldiers collaborated to root out any further caches of wildfire or suspicious agents. They found a handful of unmarked crates hidden in a coastal cave, enough to destroy half a fleet. Davos, skilled at sniffing out smuggling operations, led the search. In the end, several more men with ties to shady sellsword companies were arrested. No direct link to a single lord or region emerged, but it was clear that some group had funded them, perhaps from Essos. Daenerys could not ignore the possibility of Cersei's last supporters or other exiles plotting from afar. Despite the tension, negotiations with Dorne continued. Ultimately, an agreement was reached. Dorne would remain part of the Seven Kingdoms but enjoy a broad measure of local governance. Prince Corin pledged fealty to Queen Daenerys, acknowledging her dragons as protectors of the realm. In return, Daenerys promised not to impose outside rulers or hamper Dornish traditions. The alliance was sealed with a grand feast in Sunspear's sun-baked courtyard. Musicians played the famous Dornish drums, and spiced wine flowed freely. The people, though still on edge from the wildfire scare, relaxed somewhat as they saw their prince and queen in harmony. On the final day of her visit, Daenerys climbed atop Drogon near the palace walls and took flight across the desert at dawn. The heat swelled under them, the rising sun transforming the dunes into a sea of gold. Rhaegal and Viserion soon joined her, weaving graceful arcs overhead. From their vantage, Daenerys could see caravans winding along dusty roads, far-off oasis towns where glimmers of water sparkled like jewels. This was the land that had defied Targaryen conquest for generations, scorching would-be invaders with guerrilla tactics and an unforgiving climate. Now it flew the Targaryen banner willingly if somewhat warily. Far below, farmers emerged from adobe dwellings to stare and wave at the dragons. Some fell to their knees in awe. Others simply shaded their eyes and watched. Daenerys felt a pang of hope, a sense that perhaps she could unite these disparate kingdoms after all. With unstoppable dragons overhead, who would dare revert to the old cycle of endless wars? The flight north back to King's Landing took a few more days by sea, and Daenerys' mind spun with questions about what new threats might lurk. The wildfire plot had rattled her, reminding her that while her dragons were invulnerable to spears and arrows, there remained forces in the world that could cause immense destruction to her people and her rule. She vowed to be vigilant. Upon her return, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark both greeted her at the docks. Sansa had traveled south to discuss trade with the crown, bringing Arya as well, though Arya was nowhere to be seen, probably roaming the city. Daenerys exchanged polite words with Sansa, noticing a new warmth in her demeanor. Perhaps the final victory over the White Walkers and these months of peace had softened old tensions. That evening, they convened a grand council in the Red Keep's throne room, attended by major lords and ladies from across the realm. Daenerys addressed them about the new pact with Dorne, the threat of hidden wildfire, and the necessity of vigilance. She made it clear that any sabotage or assault on innocent lives would be met with swift retribution. With Drogon perched outside on the massive courtyard spire, the effect was not lost on anyone. Sansa took the floor, speaking of the North's gratitude. She acknowledged the flow of resources from the south and stressed the importance of further cooperation. Lords from the Stormlands and the Reach voiced their willingness to abide by the Queen's law. The Westerlands, lacking a single unifying leader, offered cautious words but no outright defiance. Gradually, the meeting ended with a renewed sense of unity, perhaps tenuous but genuine enough. Arya appeared afterward, silent as a shadow. She slipped into the courtyard where Daenerys stood with Regal. The dragon rumbled softly at the new presence, but Arya merely tilted her head, studying the beast. Daenerys watched from the corner of her eye, intrigued by this young woman's calm fearlessness. "He won't hurt you," Daenerys said at last. Arya ran her fingers along Regal's scales, a faint spark of wonder in her otherwise inscrutable face. "I never thought I'd see dragons in my lifetime. I used to hear old Nan's stories about them in Winterfell. They sounded like fairy tales." Daenerys nodded. They were almost fairy tales indeed. But fate had other plans. Arya glanced toward the Red Keep. "I hear you're doing good things for the small folk, feeding them, offering them justice. Some of them say you're not like your father." Daenerys felt a flicker of gratitude. "I hope they're right." Arya's keen eyes settled on Daenerys. "A good queen is hard to come by. A just one is rarer still. Don't break the people's faith, or you'll have more to fear than wildfire." The words sounded almost like a warning, but Daenerys sensed no hostility. Rather an honest caution from someone who had seen how rulers could fail their subjects. She inclined her head. "I won't break it. Not if I can help it." Arya nodded, gave one last look at Regal, then melted away into the shadows, leaving Daenerys to wonder at the myriad shapes the Stark family had taken. Time continued its steady march. Seasons shifted. Spring's mild rains gave way to a vibrant summer, warmer than any in recent memory. With the improved weather came more bountiful harvests, trade expansions, and the blossoming of new alliances. The Iron Bank of Bravos sent its envoys, who left satisfied that the crown would honor the Lannister debts, albeit under fairer terms. The free cities began to see Daenerys as a stable monarch, not just a conqueror on the rise. Every so often, Daenerys would fly to the Wall, even though the Night King was gone, to ensure the region remained secure. She funded repairs to the shattered sections of the ancient ice barrier, though some argued the wall was no longer strictly necessary. Still, she preferred caution. Jon often accompanied her, taking Regal. They soared over the north's vast stretches, remembering the terrors they had once battled. The wildlings, or free folk, lived in relative peace these days, scattered in newly granted lands south of the Wall, many integrated with northern villages. One evening, during such a visit, Daenerys and Jon landed their dragons atop a crag near Castle Black. The air was crisp and cold, though gentler than the biting winters of the past. Regal and Drogon lay coiled in a hollow, their sides rising and falling in slumber. Jon and Daenerys stood on a ledge overlooking the snowy plains. "They seem content," Jon said quietly, nodding to the dragons. "No more wars to fight." Daenerys drew closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Perhaps they feel our own peace. Sometimes I wonder if they mirror our emotions more than we realize." Jon's arm came around her, holding her against the cold breeze. "Are you truly at peace?" She considered. "At times. The realm is calm, yet I know there will always be challenges. Plotters, schemers, new threats. I can't let my guard down." His expression was solemn. "We'll face them together." In that moment, the northern lights flickered on the horizon, painting the sky with shimmering curtains of green and gold. The dragons stirred, lifting their heads to watch the display. Daenerys felt the quiet hum of magic in the air. Ancient, peaceful now, no longer twisted by the Night King's presence. A soft smile curved her lips. She leaned into Jon's warmth, allowing herself a rare moment to imagine a future free of constant strife. They would rule with fairness, guided by the unstoppable might of dragons who soared above petty rivalries. If children came, they would have a realm worth inheriting. If not, perhaps they would designate an heir worthy of leading the next generation. She refused to let fear or prophecy dictate her life any longer. When they returned to King's Landing, fresh tidings awaited them, news of a so-called dragon cult emerging in the Stormlands. worshipping Daenerys and her children as incarnations of the old Balerion gods. Daenerys found it disconcerting but also oddly predictable. Whenever power manifested on such a scale, superstition flourished. She issued a measured proclamation. While she respected freedom of worship, she did not condone extremist groups that threatened established order. Her subjects could revere or dislike her, but she would not have blood sacrifices or violent zealotry in her name. Still, the rumor of a dragon cult persisted, traveling by word of mouth. Tyrion assured her it would likely fade, just another curiosity in a realm hungry for wonder. Far more worrisome were the handful of cunning lords who might use religious fervor to manipulate the small folk. Daenerys resolved to keep an ear to the ground, reminding herself that cunning had brought down many a powerful ruler in the past. Dragons were unstoppable in open battle, but poison, sabotage, and hidden conspiracies were an ever-present threat. Summer turned into autumn, the leaves in the crownlands shifting to reds and oranges. Harvest festivals filled the city squares, and Daenerys made a point to appear among the crowds whenever she could, letting them see her as more than a distant queen. The presence of her dragons overhead still caused commotion, but she noticed that the people's fear had evolved into something closer to awe and acceptance. Children ran through the streets with wooden dragon carvings, and vendors sold sweet pastries shaped like dragon eggs. On one such autumn day, a new development arrived. Envoys from the free city of Volantis, heavily guarded and bearing the banners of the Temple of the Lord of Light, came seeking an audience. They brought exotic gifts, including a gilded chest of smoky incense said to be used in R'hlloreth's most sacred ceremonies. With them was a red priestess named Rhaenyra, cloaked in deep crimson. She requested a private meeting with Daenerys, claiming she carried vital tidings of prophecy. Daenerys was wary. She had encountered red priests before. Some had proclaimed her Azor Ahai reborn, or claimed that her dragons were the instruments of the Lord of Light. She recalled how Melisandre had once believed in Stannis Baratheon, only to shift her allegiance to Jon Snow. Still, she granted the audience, curious if there was new insight. Rhaenyra entered the throne room with measured grace, eyes shining as if lit by an inner flame. She bowed low, the golden necklace around her throat gleaming. "Your Grace, Daenerys Stormborn, Mother of Dragons, the Lord of Light has guided me here to speak of the fire that cleansed the north." The long night ended, yet shadows linger in corners unseen. Daenerys remained seated on the Iron Throne, flanked by Grey Worm and an alert Missandei. "I've had enough of prophecies and shadows. Speak plainly. What do you claim to see?" Rhaenyra's voice resonated with quiet intensity. "I see a time of golden peace under your reign, a flame that warms but does not consume. But beyond the seas to the east, a hidden darkness gathers, an enemy of the light that seeks to harness powers older than the dragons. I cannot say when or how, but the flames reveal the shape of a threat rising from the ashes of Valyria." Tyrion, standing at Daenerys' side, raised an eyebrow. "Valyria? The Doom destroyed that land centuries ago." The Red Priestess inclined her head. "So it did, but some powers never truly vanish. The visions show a figure in shadows calling on the cursed knowledge of the old blood mages. It may be years away or decades, but it stirs." Daenerys felt a chill despite the warmth of the hall. She remembered her ancestors' tales of Valyria, a land of dragons and sorcery undone by cataclysmic forces. The idea of an ancient power re-emerging was unsettling, but the realm was vast and threats could materialize from many directions. "If such darkness stirs, we will face it when it comes. My dragons protected the living from the dead, they will do so again against any foe." Rhaenyra's gaze flicked to Daenerys' dragons, visible through the tall windows perched on the city's highest towers. "May the Lord of Light guide your fire. I offer my services should you require knowledge of the old magic." Daenerys politely dismissed her. She found herself torn between unease and skepticism. The Red Priestess could be spinning half-truths to gain favor. Or perhaps there was a kernel of truth in her visions. Either way, Daenerys would not dwell on distant threats when her realm still needed her focus. Jon joined her after the meeting, having listened quietly from behind the pillars. "You sense a trap?" he asked. Daenerys gazed out at the sky. "Not a trap, but a distraction. We can't chase every phantom. Still, keep a watch on our eastern coasts. If anything arises from beyond the sea, we'll know soon enough. The dragons can fly faster than any ship." He nodded, reassuring her with his presence. "We'll handle it together as we have everything else." Autumn deepened, then slowly gave way to a mild winter, far gentler than the one the Night King had brought. snow-dusted kings landing only lightly. The realm prepared for winter feasts rather than bracing for devastation. Daenerys had never known a winter in Westeros that did not spell hardship, but this season felt different, less a threat, more a cycle of rest before rebirth. Cersei Lannister remained exiled under guard in the Westerlands, living in a fortress far from the seat of power. She was watched carefully, visited occasionally by royal inspectors to ensure she plotted no new treachery. Word came that she sank deeper into bitter solitude, haunted by her downfall. Euron Greyjoy's name seldom surfaced. Some whispered he had been devoured by sea monsters, while others claimed he lurked in distant islands with a handful of loyal cutthroats. In either case, he was no longer a threat. In this climate of relative peace, Daenerys decided to host a grand gathering at the Dragon Pit, part festival, part assembly of the realm's notables. The ancient structure had been partially rebuilt, its collapsed dome cleared away, revealing the open sky. The stands were refurbished to seat many spectators, and the floor of the pit had been leveled for public events. She announced it as a celebration of unity, inviting lords, knights, merchants, and commoners alike to witness the majesty of her dragons and the shared prosperity that had emerged from their victory. On the appointed day, the city thrummed with excitement. Crowds poured up the streets toward the Dragon Pit, carrying flags and wearing their finest clothes. Soldiers in polished armor stood guard, though the mood was festive. Daenerys arrived on horseback, leading a procession of knights, advisors, and her personal guard. Tyrion rode near her, resplendent in a velvet cloak, while Jon, on another horse, flashed a rare smile at the cheering throngs. Inside the Dragon Pit, colorful banners and ribbons fluttered in the brisk breeze. The stands were packed. Lords from every region filled the royal dais, while lesser nobles and commoners found seats wherever they could. Food stalls and jugglers dotted the perimeter. The sun shone brightly overhead. When Daenerys signaled, the great gates at one end opened and Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion entered in a thunder of wings. A gasp rippled through the spectators as the dragons soared above, their shadows sweeping over the stands. Even those who had seen dragons before stood in awe at how large they had become, each one capable of blotting out the sun if they chose. Drogon alighted in the center of the Dragon Pit, folding his colossal wings around him. The ground shook under his weight. Rhaegal and Viserion settled nearby, releasing low rumbles that vibrated the very air. Daenerys dismounted from her horse and stepped forward, Rhaegal in a black and scarlet gown. The crowd hushed. Thousands of eyes focused on her. She lifted her voice, projecting with confidence learned from many battles and speeches. People of Westeros, you have endured trials beyond measure. You have faced the long night and seen it defeated. You have seen armies rise and fall, houses torn asunder by war, and still you stand. Today, I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as your queen, a queen who would see the realm united in peace and prosperity. A wave of murmurs and applause spread. She continued, gesturing to the dragons. These children of mine were born from fire, yet they defend the living. They have proven unstoppable against all who sought to harm the innocent. With them, we banished the terror of the White Walkers. With them, we toppled tyrants who cared nothing for your welfare. But we do not rule through fear alone. We stand together for the good of all. The applause grew thunderous. Daenerys saw tears in some eyes, awe in others. She caught Jon's gaze, and he inclined his head in encouragement. Tyrion watched from his seat, an approving smile tugging at his lips. Daenerys gestured for the dragons to rise. Drogon unfurled his wings, and Rhaegal and Viserion followed suit. The three of them stretched upward, casting massive silhouettes on the sunlit ground. Then, at a word from Daenerys, they took flight, circling over the open dome of the Dragon Pit. The crowd erupted in cheers, marveling at the spectacle, true living wonders belonging to no age but their own. For a moment, Daenerys stood in the center of it all, letting the cheers wash over her. She recalled the countless roads that had led her here, from the hot, wind-blown seas of Essos to the frozen wastes beyond the wall, from a frightened girl sold into marriage to a queen commanding unstoppable power. She had seen horror and heartbreak, love and sacrifice, triumph and tragedy. But here, in this moment, she witnessed the fruit of those labors, a realm that saw in her the promise of stability, a queen determined to break the cycles of devastation. The festival continued with justs, archery displays, and performances by bards who sang of dragonfire and the end of the long night. Delegates from Dorne, the Reach, the North, and other corners of the land exchanged gifts and pleasantries. Children ran about, playing at being little Targaryens on toy dragons. Wine flowed, and bread was shared. For a day, at least, all tensions seemed subdued by celebration. High above, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion soared like living guardians. a triumvirate of might never before witnessed. Some claimed they could sense the joy below, for they performed looping dives and let out echoing calls that resonated over the city. None of the watchers doubted that these dragons were forces of nature, unstoppable and magnificent, bound to a queen who aspired to use their power for the good of all. As twilight fell, torches were lit around the dragon pit. Musicians switched to slower, more haunting melodies. Daenerys found herself seated on a raised platform, Jon by her side, Tyrion and other counselors nearby. They spoke of how far they had come, how improbable it all seemed in hindsight. Every so often, someone mentioned the future, perhaps expansions of trade, or the official crowning ceremony once the realm felt stable enough. Jon leaned toward Daenerys, his voice low. "Can you see it? The day when we no longer need the threat of dragonfire to keep the peace." She stared into the flickering torchlight. "I hope so, but if my dragons exist only as a threat, then what would that make me? I want them to be symbols of protection, not intimidation. Perhaps that day will come when the realm's wounds have healed." He took her hand gently. "That day will come if we keep faith in one another." She clasped his hand back, grateful. For so long, she had been driven by the need to reclaim a birthright, to liberate the oppressed, to defeat the unstoppable darkness. Now, she stood on the other side of those battles, forging a new tapestry for Westeros. It would not be easy, yet she sensed the tide of history had shifted, that a new age was being born. When at last the festival ended and people drifted back to their homes or encampments, Daenerys strolled across the pit's floor. Drogon landed beside her with a gust of wind, stirring dust in swirling eddies. She placed her hand on his warm scales, hearing the deep rumble in his chest. Rhaegal and Viserion landed in the open yard beyond, their heads turning as if to watch her. She smiled, remembering how she had once dreamed of a world where dragons soared free, unburdened by mortal cruelties. A realm that recognized their majesty, not as monsters but as guardians. The hush of the night seemed to hold its breath, and Daenerys felt that if the world could speak, it would be in the roar of dragonfire. Terrible, beautiful, and full of promise. Tomorrow and the next day, new challenges would arise. Rivals, plots, whispers of distant threats. But for now, Daenerys Stormborn stood victorious, surrounded by a realm beginning to mend, and blessed by dragons no spear or bolt could ever fell. She felt the thrum of their power echo in her own veins, the call of her heritage that was both iron will and fierce compassion. She felt Jon's silent encouragement, Tyrion's steady counsel, Missandei's unwavering loyalty, and the realm's guarded hope. With Drogon's breath misting in the cool air, Daenerys touched her forehead to the dragon's scaled cheek. It was like leaning against a mountain that breathed, a force that had reshaped the destiny of an entire continent. "We have done well," she whispered, voice full of quiet awe. "But there is more to do." Drogon rumbled, as though in agreement, and Daenerys felt an overwhelming sense of unity with this creature. Her child, her weapon, her symbol of rebirth and transformation. Once she had questioned whether the dragons might be a curse, but now she saw how they had become the realm's shield against chaos. No White Walker's ice, no mortal's blade, no cunning scorpion had broken them. They had faced the greatest evils this age could produce and emerged unscathed. That night, as she retired to her chambers in the Red Keep, the city's lights twinkling below, she looked toward the starlit sky and imagined the future. Maybe, in years to come, songs would speak of the unstoppable dragons who brought peace and prosperity under a queen's rule. A queen who never forgot what it was to be powerless and used that memory to guide her strength. She let the thought comfort her. Outside, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion curled into slumber. Rhaegal sentinels over a land still carrying its scars but daring to hope. They were living testament that even the impossible could be made real, that from the ashes of old wars and ancient curses, something magnificent could rise. And so they slept, their queen's vow echoing in their dreams. Peace, justice, and a flame that would never be extinguished. For as long as they lived, and they would live long indeed, no arrow, no bolt, no spear of ice or steel would ever bring them down. Their hide was too strong, their spirit too fierce. And so the people of Westeros breathed easier, comforted by the knowledge that if ever a new darkness rose from the corners of the world, Daenerys Targaryen's dragons would meet it in the skies, turning night into blazing dawn once more. Daenerys Targaryen woke to a hush that had settled over King's Landing in the pre-dawn hour. She had grown accustomed to finding solace in the quiet before the bustle of courtly life began, a silence made all the more profound by the muffled presence of her dragons. They slept on the high spires of the Red Keep or nestled in the wide courtyard outside the thick walls, content with the knowledge that no foe threatened them, or, by extension, their queen. But in those liminal moments between moonlight and sunrise, Daenerys often found herself alone with the weight of her responsibilities. She rose and dressed carefully, choosing a simpler gown than the fineries that formal audiences demanded. A swath of deep red cloth clung to her shoulders, embroidered with subtle patterns that mirrored dragon scales. Though a queen might appear draped in jewels, Daenerys still preferred garments that allowed freedom of movement. Her silver-gold hair she braided loosely. Then she moved through the corridors of the Red Keep, descending to the courtyard to greet the dawn and, if fortune allowed, her children before the swirl of the day's burdens began. The guards recognized her at once, bowing or saluting, but she waved them off gently. Although she appreciated their devotion, she wanted these moments to herself. Missandei, usually present at her side, was still abed. The queen had insisted that her closest advisor rest rather than wake so early. Daenerys reached the courtyard gate and looked up. In the faint glimmer of dawn, she saw Drogon perched atop a turret overlooking Blackwater Bay. His outlines were barely distinguishable, so massive he seemed an extension of the castle itself. She could sense, in that half-conscious way, his subtle stirring, a faint shift in his weight, a rumble somewhere deep in his throat. Dragons did not sleep like humans. They dozed in cycles, alert to changes in their environment even when their eyes were closed. She made her way across the courtyard to where Rhaegal and Viserion had curled around each other. Their slumber was lighter than Drogon's. Sometimes they enjoyed the warmth of each other's scales. They stirred at her approach, lifting enormous heads that glowed pale green and pearly gold in the uncertain light. Steam curled from their nostrils, chasing away the last chill of night. Daenerys placed one hand against Rhaegal's flank. Though his scales felt as unyielding as steel plates, she could still sense the life's warmth beneath her palm. A memory flickered of the first time she'd realized her dragons were growing beyond any recorded measure, surpassing even Balerion's fabled skull. How small they had once been, perched on her shoulders in the red waste. Now Rhaegal's slumbering bulk nearly dwarfed the courtyard itself, and his wing, half unfolded, looked broad enough to cast a shadow over half the city. Viserion regarded her with glimmering eyes, letting out a soft hiss that sounded more like a greeting than a threat. Daenerys moved between them, marveling at how they both recognized her presence instantly. They shifted to accommodate her, lowering their spined tails so she could pass. Even with no immediate foe in sight, that primal bond still made her heart race. They were her children, living citadels of flame that had shattered the army of the dead. And if rumors of conspiracies and hidden threats lingered in the shadows, well, let them linger. She and her dragons were prepared. A brush of movement at the courtyard's edge caught her eye. Jon Snow emerged from behind a colonnade, wearing a thick cloak against the dawn's chill. He offered her a small smile, the sort that still held an edge of awe. The two of them had found a measure of closeness through the trials of war, but every time he beheld her with the dragons, Daenerys could see that quiet amazement rekindle behind his dark eyes. "You're awake early," she said, voice soft so as not to stir the dragons into flight. "Couldn't sleep?" Jon shook his head, stepping nearer. "I've grown used to the northern hours. Waking before dawn is second nature. That or I had too many thoughts rattling in my head. Sansa sent another raven late last night with a list of concerns from the north." He offered a rueful shrug. "Everything from supply lines to how best to handle a few wildling families who've settled too close to certain holds. Nothing dire, just complicated." Daenerys understood. The realm, though largely at peace, was never short on such complexities. "We'll see to it together," she assured him. Then she gestured lightly at Rhaegal. "He might want to stretch his wings soon. Do you feel like flying? Jon hesitated, glancing at the scale ridges and the fanged muzzle. Although he had flown with Regal many times now, particularly during the battles against the Night King, he still carried a mixture of trepidation and reverence for the dragons. But he nodded. It might clear my head. Where to? Above the city, perhaps just to greet the new day, Daenerys said. We'll only be gone a short while. I won't have time for a long flight. There's a council session at midday. Jon gave a small laugh. I can't say I enjoy councils, but if we must, we must. Together, they approached Regal, whose green-scaled head rose at the sound of their voices. Daenerys stroked his muzzle, murmuring reassurances. Then Jon climbed into the makeshift saddle, still a rudimentary design, though the Dothraki had improved it bit by bit for comfort. Viserion watched with mild curiosity, cocking his pale head while Drogon shifted high above on the tower as if to keep watch. With a mighty flap of wings, Regal leapt from the courtyard. Jon clutched the ridges along the dragon's neck, a thrill coursing through him. Daenerys shielded her eyes from the rush of wind and watched them rise above the ramparts, swirling in a graceful arc that took them over the lower wards of King's Landing. Even so early, a few folk were awake, fishermen prepping their boats, bakers stoking ovens. Some glimpsed Regal overhead and raised an astonished hand, pointing out the dragon's figure to others still yawning in doorways. Daenerys felt that pang of pride, of wonder, of memory. Once such a sight would have seemed impossible in Westeros. A living dragon, so large that its wings blotted out rooftops, carrying a stark and secret Targaryen through the sky. So much had changed. She lifted her gaze to Drogon, who regarded her from the tower's parapet. If she wished, she could fly as well. But this morning, she chose to remain on the ground, content to let Jon have that moment of clarity. Instead, she turned her thoughts to the day's impending matters, a small council meeting, a dispute between the Tyrell stewards in Highgarden and a newly risen minor house, the continuing investigations regarding the wildfire discovered in Dorne, and the uncertain tidings from across the sea where rumors abounded of new Sellsword companies forming in the chaos of Essosa's shifting alliances. She exhaled, stepping closer to Viserion. "Shall we walk, my sweet?" she whispered. Viserion rumbled softly, nudging her shoulder as though disappointed they would not be soaring. But he let her trail a hand along his warm flank as they crossed the courtyard. The gentle clink of the Red Keep's gates opening signaled the arrival of an early carriage or perhaps a supply cart. No threat, no sense of urgency. Soon, Missandei emerged with a handful of scribes, her expression bright even in the early hour. "Your Grace," she called, bowing her head respectfully before continuing in a lighter tone, "I see you're already about. Tyrion is stirring. He wants to discuss the Iron Bank's new proposal once you have time. And Davos is speaking with the harbor officials about the shipments to the north. Also there is no end to tasks, I know." Daenerys smiled, though a hint of resignation pulled at her lips. "Let Tyrion know I'll meet with him in my solar within the hour. We'll handle the Iron Bank business and then proceed with everything else." Missandei inclined her head. "Very well, Your Grace. Also, the High Septon has sent word that the Great September reconstruction is moving forward faster than expected. He requests your presence next week to bless the new foundation stones." Daenerys felt a flicker of apprehension at the notion of formal blessings. She had no particular hostility toward the faith. She had learned to coexist with these institutions, but the memory of how fanatics once controlled King's Landing under the High Sparrow was never far from her mind. "I'll attend," she said at last. "It's important the people see I'm not their enemy. But I'll bring guards, and I want no re-establishment of the faith militant. Make that plain. We can support the faith's rebuilding without letting them seize power." Missandei nodded, then stepped aside as Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied approached, escorting a small group of petitioners. Daenerys recognized them as crafters who had come from the Westerlands. She steeled herself for a quick conversation, mindful that her morning peace was soon to be overtaken by duties. Before the crafters could speak, a rush of wind signaled Regal's return. Jon guided the dragon back into the courtyard with more grace than in his earlier days of flying. He seemed to have grown sure in the saddle. Regal stirred dust as he touched down, folding his wings carefully. The crafters and Grey Worm flinched back at the sudden gust, but no one fled. They had grown accustomed to the presence of dragons, though never entirely comfortable. Jon dismounted, exhaling a faint laugh. "Your city looks different from the skies," he told Daenerys. "Calmer, more hopeful." Daenerys reached for his arm. "I like to think that's what we've accomplished." They exchanged a brief, understanding smile, then turned to the crafters who bowed respectfully. One of them, a middle-aged man with a dusty apron, spoke, "Your Grace, we have come to deliver goods you requested, fine metal castings for the city's new aqueduct system. We heard word you wanted them tested for structural integrity. We're at your service." Daenerys gave a thoughtful nod. "Excellent. Present them to the city engineers. Tyrion will want to see the results. I trust your craftsmanship is worthy of the crown's coin." The man bowed even lower. "Yes, Your Grace. We'll do you proud." Thus began another day, a barrage of tasks, each seemingly small but collectively shaping the realm. Daenerys moved through them methodically, meeting with Tyrion about the Iron Bank's revised loan terms, discussing trade arrangements with Davos, speaking with Sansa via Raven about northern logistics. She found a moment to eat at midday, though the meal was brief. From there, she presided over a small court session in the throne room, hearing grievances ranging from boundary disputes to the governance of gull-infested docks. One petition of note came from an old noble line that claimed descent from the Blackfyre pretenders centuries ago, some distant, obscure branch. They asked for royal recognition of their house name. The request made Tyrion arch an eyebrow and Davos scratch his beard in bemusement. The petitioner, a gaunt man named Ser Linford Waters, insisted that his forebears had once served House Targaryen before the rebellion of the Blackfyres. Daenerys was cautious. Any mention of Blackfyres recalled a painful history, pretenders who had nearly torn the realm asunder in repeated rebellions. Still, the realm was in a new era. Old grudges might be set aside if no present threat accompanied them. Daenerys questioned him gently, gleaning that his line had no ambition beyond the restoration of a name. Ser Linford swore unwavering loyalty to the crown, liming any desire for a separate monarchy or rebellion. Tyrion leaned in to whisper, "Let him have a token acknowledgement. It costs us nothing, and it might earn us another loyalist." Daenerys tapped her fingers on the Iron Throne. She looked down at the supplicant, seeing only a thin man of advancing years who longed for the ghosts of a prouder ancestry. "Very well, Ser Linford. We will grant your line the name Blackbriar to separate you from the stigma of the Blackfyres. You may display a sigil derived from Targaryen colors if you wish, but know that any disloyalty will be met with the full force of the crown. Is that understood?" The man practically wept with gratitude, swearing his oath on the spot. Daenerys nodded, feeling a ripple of relief. It was better to quell a potential grievance with a minor concession than let it fester into something larger. Once court concluded, Daenerys's temple throbbed with the strain of hours spent listening and judging. She requested a brief reprieve to her solar, where Missandei had a freshly prepared pot of tea and a platter of fruits waiting. Tyrion joined her, unceremoniously pouring himself a cup of wine. Davos entered soon after, flipping through a stack of parchment bearing seals from half a dozen lords. "The Iron Bank has agreed to lower the interest rate in exchange for a more favorable shipping lane agreement," Tyrion informed her, swirling his wine. "They're cunning, of course, but we did better in negotiations this time around. They sense you aren't desperate for coin. Our coffers grow steadily thanks to peace, and your dragons deterring any serious tax dodgers." Daenerys managed a hint of a smile. "We're not using the dragons to threaten tax collectors, Tyrion." He smirked. "Not overtly, no. But the possibility that they could show up if a rebellious house refuses to pay, well, it certainly clarifies matters for them." Davos glanced up. "I spoke with men in the harbor. They say trade with the north flourishes and new routes are opening to the free cities. Volantis, especially, seems eager to engage. That red priestess from before, Rhaenyra, remains in King's Landing, speaking of portents, but so far, she hasn't caused trouble." At the mention of Rhaenyra, Daenerys felt a pang of unease. She recalled the woman's warning about shadows stirring in Valyria or beyond. Perhaps we should let her remain so we can keep watch on her. She may have some use. Or perhaps she's feeding us illusions. Either way, if her presence causes no harm, we'll tolerate it for now. Davos nodded. She set up a small temple near the docks, chanting praises to the Dragon Queen and the Lord of Light. The sailors are curious. No sign of any radical behavior. Daenerys sipped her tea, letting the warm liquid soothe her. "Keep me informed. The last thing we need is another fanatic uprising." They spoke of other matters. The slow reconstruction of the Dragonbit, the new aqueduct systems, and news from Dorne about the wildfire conspirators. Some leads pointed to shadowy sellswords with old ties to the Golden Company. A few had fled into remote corners of Essos. Daenerys considered sending envoys, but Tyrion advised patience. Chasing them across the sea might stir more unrest. "We have no direct proof they plan to move against you again. Let them run." Night had fallen by the time Daenerys withdrew to her quarters, worn but satisfied with the day's progress. The following morning, she rose early again, mindful of the sheer volume of tasks. That day, Jon had invited her to accompany him to the north to settle the matter of the wildling encampments. She agreed. A queen could not rule by distance alone. Besides, she had missed the crisp northern air, and part of her wanted to see how Winterfell fared under Sansa's stewardship. They prepared for the journey swiftly. The Sandai would stay behind in King's Landing to handle immediate administrative duties alongside Tyrion. Davos elected to join them, suspecting that his experience bridging Northmen and other factions would help. Grey Worm left a portion of the Unsullied to guard the Red Keep, then selected a smaller contingent to accompany Daenerys. But no number of soldiers or wagons compared to the power of flight. Daenerys intended to ride Drogon, Jon would ride Rhaegal. Viserion would follow unburdened, free to roam. The rest of their retinue would travel by ship or horse carrying supplies. That was the gift of dragons. What took weeks on foot took days aloft. They set out at dawn, departing from the wide yard beside the Red Keep. By then, the city was already stirring, vendors calling out their wares, the rattle of cartwheels on cobblestones. People stopped to watch as the dragons spread their enormous wings and launched themselves into the sky, gusting clouds of dust through the streets. Daenerys, seated on Drogon's back, felt that familiar surge of power and freedom as the rooftops fell away beneath them. She caught glimpses of wide-eyed children pointing, and she raised a hand in a silent farewell. Rhaegal soared just behind, Jon's dark cloak fluttering in the wind while Viserion circled overhead like a pale guardian. The flight north was swift, the dragons covering leagues in a fraction of the time any mortal steed required. They chose a path along the coast at first, skirting the waters of the narrow sea, then cut inland above the riverlands where autumnal forests stretched out in russet and gold. At times, Daenerys signaled a descent so they could rest or hunt. The dragons devoured wild game, plucking deer from meadows or snapping trout from rivers. Jon proved more adept now at guiding Rhaegal when the dragon stooped for a meal, though he still sometimes wore that look of astonished caution. Daenerys guided Drogon with practiced ease, communicating through touches against his spined neck and the subtle pressure of her legs. When they took respite on a broad plain, Davos and Grey Worm arrived a few hours later by horse. The camp they set up was modest, tents, and small fires. The presence of 3 dragons grazing in the nearby hills, scorching patches of earth to cook their kills, made it unnecessary to post extensive perimeter guards. Only a fool or a mad ant would attack a party accompanied by those creatures. After a few nights of such travel, they reached the neck, that narrow swampland dividing the north from the rest of Westeros. Old ruins dotted the landscape, reminders of ancient battles and shifts in power. Daenerys found it all humbling, so many centuries of war, yet the land persisted. She guided Drogon to circle low, taking in the twisting waterways and the labyrinth of bogs. Through the swirling mists, she glimpsed the towers of Moat Cailin, battered by time and conflict. Even from the skies, it was an imposing fortress when well manned. They did not linger long, pressing onward. On the evening of the 5th day, Winterfell finally appeared on the horizon, rising from a sea of rolling hills blanketed in the early snows of the north. Even from a distance, Daenerys recognized the tall keep and the outer walls. The Godswood's ancient trees stood stark against the surrounding whiteness. Smoke curled from chimneys and the banners of House Stark rippled in the cold wind. The dragons announced their arrival with echoing roars, sending the castle into a flurry of activity. Sentries lit torches along the battlements, though most by now were familiar with the sight of dragons overhead. Daenerys spied figures converging in the courtyard, soldiers, servants, and a handful of onlookers drawn by the spectacle. She noticed Sansa's unmistakable red hair among them, alongside Arya's slight figure. Daenerys guided Drogon into a slow, measured descent, mindful of swirling snow. Rhaegal and Viserion flanked her, landing a short distance away to avoid collisions with towers or walls. The ground trembled as they touched down. Snow billowed in a halo around them, momentarily obscuring the courtyard. When the air cleared, Daenerys slipped from Drogon's saddle. Jon did the same, wincing at the cold wind after the warmth of flight. A hush fell among the gathered watchers, broken by a loud bark of a hound or the soft exclamations of stable hands. Sansa stepped forward, her mantle trimmed in dark fur. She nodded in greeting, and her expression suggested a guarded warmth. "Welcome back," she said, her voice clear in the twilight hush. "We've readied your chambers and the kitchens have prepared a feast. I assume you'll be staying a while?" Daenerys inclined her head. "Thank you, Lady Sansa. Yes, we have business in the north, some issues with the free folk and certain lords, and we wanted to see Winterfell again. I trust all is well." Sansa cast a glance behind her. Arya stood there, arms folded, a subtle grin tugging at her lips. "Well enough," Sansa replied. "We continue to rebuild. The long night left many scars, but your help has been invaluable. Food from the Reach, coin from the crown. The people appreciate it." Jon moved to greet his sisters, exchanging a brief embrace with Sansa and a warmer one with Arya. The Stark siblings drew close, talking in low tones of how things had changed. Arya's gaze flicked to Daenerys and the dragons. She smirked faintly, as if acknowledging that few sights surprised her anymore. "Will your dragons remain here in the courtyard?" Arya asked Daenerys. Daenerys studied the space. Winterfell's yard was large, but the three dragons took up a daunting amount of room, especially now that they'd grown beyond most men's wildest imagination. "They can rest outside the castle walls if needed," she said. "They're accustomed to open spaces. They'll likely roost on a nearby hill or tower if they wish." Sansa nodded. "We've cleared some land near the old training fields beyond the eastern gate. It might suit them better." Grey Worm and Davos arrived shortly thereafter with the main retinue, and the courtyard stirred with the bustle of stabling horses, distributing gear, and finding shelter. Daenerys oversaw a portion of it, then followed Sansa into the great hall where torches and a roaring fire banished the northern chill. Servants rushed to set extra tables, carrying platters of roasted meats, bread, and thick stews. At the high table, Daenerys took a seat beside Jon, with Sansa on Jon's other side. Arya sat across from them, next to Davos and Grey Worm. The clang of cups and the low hum of conversation filled the hall as many northern lords, knights, and soldiers filtered in. Daenerys recognized Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, and a few others who had once hesitated to bend the knee. But now they seemed more at ease, exchanging polite bows and murmured toasts in her direction. When the meal began, Sansa explained the situation. A group of free folk, led by a man named Darik the Ox, had settled near the Long Lake. Some Stark bannermen complained that the free folk were hunting on land considered part of House Serwyn's domain. Meanwhile, a few ex-soldiers from the Vale had wandered north and clashed with these free folk, leading to scuffles. No one had died yet, but tensions were rising. "I tried sending a few ravens back and forth," Sansa said, "but the free folk don't place much trust in ravens or formal decrees. They respect direct contact. That's why I thought you might help, Jon. You have their trust from your time as Lord Commander." Jon nodded. "I'll speak with them. The free folk have lost so many, they just want to live freely, but we must find a compromise that respects the local lords." "I'll see to it." Daenerys offered, "I can accompany you if necessary." Seeing the Queen might impress upon them that this realm is united under one rule. Even if they don't care about titles, they might respect the dragons at least. Sansa hesitated, exchanging a glance with Arya. "Perhaps so, but I'd advise caution. The free folk might see the dragons as intimidation. We want them to know we're not here to force them out, just to find a workable boundary." A murmur of agreement rose from the nearby lords. Davos cleared his throat. "On the other hand, your presence, your grace, might assure any local bannermen who still harbor doubts. They'll see you're personally invested in fairness." Daenerys leaned back, letting the warmth of the hearth wash over her. "Let's start with Jon heading the negotiation. I'll remain nearby, ready to mediate if needed. That way we can avoid overwhelming them with dragons unless it becomes necessary." Jon nodded, relief evident in his face. "That seems best." The meal continued with lighter talk, updates on harvest yields in the north, remarks about the upcoming winter solstice celebrations, a hint of banter from Arya about the perils of northern roads. Daenerys sensed a shift in the great hall's atmosphere compared to her first arrival here so long ago. Suspicion had softened into a cautious acceptance, at least among those who recognized the Queen who saved them from the undead. The scars of distrust might never fully vanish, but they no longer reigned supreme. When the feast ended, Daenerys retired to chambers Sansa had prepared, a suite warmed by braziers and decorated with wolf sigils. A subtle sign of hospitality, but also a reminder that Winterfell was Stark territory. She was grateful for a comfortable bed after days of dragon flight. Jon lingered at her door. They exchanged a few words in hushed tones, acknowledging the progress they had made bridging north and south. Then he departed for his own chamber, leaving Daenerys to slip beneath heavy furs. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant howling of wind around the ramparts and letting the day's fatigue pull her into sleep. Morning arrived crisp and cold, painting the windows with frost. Daenerys rose, dressed in furs and practical leather, then joined Jon, Sansa, and a small company in the courtyard. They readied horses. Dragons would remain behind for now, except for Regal dozing on the far side of the castle walls. Drogon and Viserion had flown off to hunt, as the north offered fewer grazing herds than the southern plains. They likely sought wild goats in the mountains or roamed the skies for fish in the frigid rivers. The journey to Long Lake took them through snow-dusted forests, silent but for the crunch of hooves and the steady breath of horses. Davos, Arya, and a handful of Stark guards accompanied them, along with Grey Worm and 2 Unsullied. Sansa remained at Winterfell to handle matters of the keep. The company was small enough not to appear threatening, but capable enough to defend themselves if needed. Jon led them to a broad clearing where the free folk had constructed a haphazard village, wooden shacks, lean-tos, and smoke rising from cooking fires. They approached slowly, hands visible. Figures emerged from between the makeshift huts, tall, fur-clad men and women armed with axes and spears. One man stepped forth, thick-bearded and broad-shouldered, scanning the party with keen blue eyes. Daenerys guessed he was Darik the Ox. Jon dismounted, lifting a hand in greeting. "Darik," he called. "Jon Snow, once of the Night's Watch, once king in the north, but now a servant of the crown. We've come to talk." Darik crossed his arms. "We remember you, Crow. You opened the gate once, let my people south to escape the dead." His gaze flicked over Daenerys and the others. "But these fancy folk, them I don't know." Daenerys slid from her horse, stepping forward with measured calm. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, queen of these lands. And though my clothes might be fancy, as you say, I fought against the dead as well. My dragons helped drive away the Night King's army." A flicker of recognition moved through the free folk crowd, though some just exchanged wary glances. Darik spat in the snow, not exactly hostile, but guarded. "A queen, huh? Heard plenty about queens. Heard how your father was a madman too." Daenerys held his gaze. "I'm not my father. I'm here to make sure you can settle peacefully without trespassing on other folks' lands. The question is whether you'll negotiate or pick up your axes." Darik studied her a long moment. Then, to everyone's relief, he relented with a grunt. "Talk, then." Jon stepped in, explaining that the free folk could stay, but they needed to respect the boundaries of House Serwyn's hunting grounds. House Serwyn was willing to set aside new territory for them if they agreed not to raid or encroach further. Darik scratched his beard, muttering that free folk didn't bend the knee but might respect an agreement if it was fair. Daenerys listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with clarifications, ensuring the free folk understood they weren't being cast out, but they also couldn't claim land traditionally belonging to established houses. She stressed that there was enough unclaimed territory in the North's vast expanse to accommodate them, so long as they kept to the designated areas. Soon enough, a group of House Serwyn's men arrived, led by a timid functionary who spoke of boundaries and seasonal changes. Daenerys thought the conversation might devolve into insults or worse, but Jon and Davos deftly managed the tension. Arya, standing off to the side, kept a hand near her sword, eyes scanning for any threat. Ultimately, an agreement formed. The free folk would shift their settlement slightly northward to a region of forest known as the Old Pines, where Serwyn's domain ended. In exchange, they gained leave to hunt local game so long as they did not cross certain landmarks. The free folk were reluctant to accept the concept of boundaries, but Jon's presence and Daenerys' calm insistence eventually swayed them. By midday, the negotiations ended with minimal rancor. Darik led Jon and Daenerys on a brief tour of the improvised settlement, just enough to show them that these people were mostly families, trying to endure the northern cold without the resources that noble houses took for granted. Daenerys felt a pang of empathy, reminded of the many homeless she'd encountered in Essos. She quietly arranged for a shipment of winter supplies to be sent from Winterfell. "We're not your subjects," Darik said at the end, "but if your laws keep the peace, we'll abide by them for now." Daenerys nodded. "That's all we ask." They departed the camp, leaving Darik and his people to mull over the new arrangement. As they rode away, Arya rode alongside Daenerys, remarking in a low voice, "That went better than I expected. They're proud folk, and they don't trust Southerners or queens." "They might never truly trust me," Daenerys said. "But if we can avoid bloodshed, that's a victory." Arya gave a small shrug. "I'm starting to think that's the best we can hope for, enough peace so that no one is forced to fight." Jon reined in next to them, glancing over his shoulder at the settlement. "I'll send word to House Serwyn, ensure they uphold their end of the bargain. If they try to cheat the free folk, we'll have another fight on our hands." Daenerys agreed. "We'll remain a few days in the north to settle any other disputes. After that, we should return to King's Landing. Tyrion and Missandei will be awaiting updates." They rode back toward Winterfell under a cold, slate-gray sky. The negotiation had drained them, yet Daenerys felt relief that no violence had erupted. Every success, however small, was a step toward unity in a realm historically torn by strife. And for once, she had not needed to lean on her dragon's physical power to cow her opponents, an encouraging sign of progress, perhaps. 2 days passed in Winterfell, during which Daenerys reviewed local matters with Sansa. The Lady of Winterfell was methodical, presenting well-organized ledgers and accounts. They discussed the crop yields from surrounding lands, the expansions of farmland in lower altitudes, and the distribution of raw materials for repairs. For each question, Sansa had a measured response, typically pivoting to how the crown could best support or coordinate with the North. Daenerys could see the faint tension in Sansa's posture, the memory of old resentments. But they handled themselves civilly, even respectfully. At one point, Sansa mentioned in a quiet aside, "Many here still remember the pain House Targaryen inflicted decades ago, but your actions have spoken louder than rumors. You freed us from the dead, you didn't burn our castles, and you've shown respect. That means something." Daenerys only nodded, aware that trust was not given overnight. But at least they had reached an understanding, a delicate but earnest alliance forged in necessity and tempered by cooperation. On the morning of the third day, a rider came bearing news from the south. A messenger from the Stormlands requested immediate attention. He brought tidings of suspicious movements by a group calling themselves the Bloodsworn, a band of mercenaries rumored to have ties to the old Golden Company. They had been spotted near the King's Road, some days south of King's Landing, supposedly raiding small villages. Tyrion's Raven confirmed the same rumor. A cluster of well-armed sellswords attacking caravans, perhaps probing the crown's defenses. Some said they bore a device similar to the Blackfire dragon, stylized in blood red on black cloth. Daenerys felt a stirring of concern. She had just faced a petition from the so-called Blackbriar line. Could there be a renewed interest in some old claim? "We should go," Daenerys told Jon and Sansa. "If sellswords are banding together with old claims, they might target the throne. I won't have them terrorizing the countryside." Jon agreed. "We'll go at once. I'll bring Regal. The sooner we confront them, the better." Sansa offered reinforcements, but Daenerys declined politely. "Thank you, but we have enough. My dragons alone can shatter an army, if need be." She paused, forcing a small smile, though hopefully it won't come to that. They departed Winterfell that same afternoon, the dragons bearing Daenerys, Jon, and a handful of their closest. Davos, Arya, and Grey Worm took a faster route by horse, planning to meet them near Moat Cailin. Once again, flight spared them the lengthy tedium of traveling by land. The north wind clawed at their faces as Drogon and Regal ascended into pale winter skies. Viserion, returning from a hunt, spotted them and joined in a wide arc, the three beasts forming an airborne triad. Below, farmland and forest blended into a patchwork of white and brown. Daenerys scanned the horizon, her mind churning with possibilities. If these Bloodsworn mercenaries were half as brazen as rumored, they might be financed by someone with deeper pockets. No local bandit gang could mount such an organized threat. They pressed on, making camp where necessary, but covering vast distances swiftly. By the fourth day, they neared the region just south of the Crownlands, where the King's Road stretched wide and relatively flat. Smoke columns marred the horizon, signs of burned villages or sacked caravans. Daenerys felt her chest tighten with anger. The realm was hers to protect, and she refused to tolerate this violence. Jon flew alongside her, pointing to a small settlement in smoldering ruins. "We should land," he called over the wind. "Check for survivors." She nodded. Drogon descended in a swirl of dust and ash, Regal and Viserion flanking him. The settlement's few remaining structures leaned precariously, blackened timbers ready to collapse. Scattered corpses lay in the snow, victims of the raid. Daenerys dismounted, heart heavy, and walked among the debris. A handful of survivors emerged, mostly old men and frightened children. They recoiled upon seeing the dragons, but Jon and Daenerys reassured them, offering blankets and provisions from their saddlebags. "Who did this?" Daenerys asked a gaunt woman with soot-streaked cheeks. "Men with black banners," she croaked. "Red dragons on them. They called themselves the Bloodsworn, demanded gold and food. When we had none, they slaughtered us." Daenerys closed her eyes briefly, fury coiling in her gut. So these mercenaries were indeed flying a dragon banner, twisted from Targaryen imagery. Another sign that old heresies or pretenders might be stirring. She thanked the woman, promising justice. Grey Worm and Davos caught up soon after, offering what aid they could. Arya scouted the perimeter, looking for tracks. They went southeast, Arya said, kneeling by a series of hoofprints. At least 50 riders, maybe more, probably headed toward the next village. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Jon. Let's stop them now. We can track them from the air, corner them before they reach more innocents. Jon agreed at once. They mounted their dragons again. Drogon for Daenerys, Rhaegal for Jon, Viserion unburdened. Davos, Arya, and Grey Worm would follow by horse, though it might take them hours to catch up. The plan was straightforward enough. Daenerys and Jon would locate the mercenaries from the air, then signal the ground force to converge. The dragons ascended, leaving swirling ash and frightened townspeople behind. Daenerys felt a grim determination settle over her. She had spent her youth liberating slaves in Essos, punishing those who preyed on the weak. Now she would do the same in Westeros. The Bloodsworn had made a dire mistake in challenging a realm defended by living mountains of fire. It took less than an hour of searching from above before they spotted the mercenaries. A column of riders moved along a half-buried road, their banners dark as pitch, embroidered with a stylized red dragon that boasted barbed wings. Daenerys counted around 60 men, some towing packhorses laden with plunder. A handful of crossbowmen flanked them, scanning the horizon. Their leader rode at the head, clad in partial plate, a black cloak whipping in the breeze. Daenerys gestured to Jon, pointing out the group below. He nodded, circling wide on Rhaegal. Viserion soared even higher, ready to strike if needed. She wanted to give these men a chance to surrender, though she doubted it would go smoothly. Tapping Drogon's neck, she guided him into a swift dive, roaring a challenge that thundered over the plain. The mercenaries below saw the dragons and panicked. Horses reared, men shouted. Some turned to flee, others raised crossbows or spears. Daenerys landed Drogon a short distance away, wind buffeting the mercenaries with swirling snow. She remained astride him, posture regal. The black banner with the red dragon fluttered behind the lead rider. "Halt!" she shouted, her voice echoing. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Lay down your arms and surrender, or face dragonfire." A moment of frozen silence. Then the mercenary leader lifted his visor, revealing a lean face with hawkish features. He laughed, a rough, scornful sound. "We've heard of you, Dragon Queen," he sneered. "But the world has other dragons to claim the throne. We ride for the rightful line." Daenerys's expression hardened. "What rightful line? Who has hired you?" The man's gaze flicked to Rhaegal circling overhead, but he did not flinch. "We serve the true scion of House Blackfire, who will return to seize the crown that was stolen from them. Your dragons are large, but they can be killed. We've heard tales of scorpions that nearly brought one down in the last war." He gestured, and a few crossbowmen lifted their weapons, though they shook with fear. "Leave us be, or we'll fill your beast with bolts." Drogon roared, rattling the mercenaries. A few horses bucked violently, men tumbling from their saddles. Daenerys felt the surge of his fury in her own blood. She recalled the attempt on Drogon's life using the scorpion ballista. That had been a minor wound, but these men seemed oblivious to how much stronger her dragons had become. "You are fools," Daenerys said quietly. No scorpion could pierce Drogon's hide now. Even the Night King failed to slay him with ice spears. "I'll give you one last chance to surrender. Throw down your weapons. There's no reason for more bloodshed." A handful of mercenaries seemed ready to comply, shifting nervously. But the leader cursed. "Bloodsworn, stand your ground. Our cause is just." A chorus of uncertain shouts followed. Some raised their swords half-heartedly, others turned their horses to flee. The leader bellowed curses, brandishing a curved saber. He spurred his mount forward as if to charge Drogon. Daenerys felt a flash of both pity and anger. She tightened her grip on Drogon's reins, leaned forward, and uttered a single word, "Dracarys." A torrent of flame erupted from Drogon's jaws, bathing the mercenary leader in brilliant orange fire. He and his horse vanished in a roar of heat, consumed almost instantly. Around them, terrified men scrambled away, dropping weapons and flinging themselves to the ground. Some tried to shoot bolts at Drogon, but the projectiles shattered against his armored scales. Drogon roared again, unleashing another plume of flame that cut off the crossbowmen's line of retreat, forcing them to dive aside. Overhead, Regal swooped in, letting out a thunderous cry that turned the remainder of the Bloodsworn's formation into chaos. Horses bolted, men screamed. A handful took aim at Regal, but their bolts missed or bounced off harmlessly. Jon watched, grim-faced but resolute, ensuring no large cluster formed to mount a coordinated defense. Seeing their leader reduced to ash, many mercenaries finally tossed aside weapons and knelt in the snow, hands raised in surrender. Others tried to flee on horseback, riding recklessly through drifts. Daenerys gestured to Viserion overhead, who let out a roar and dove, blocking the escape route with billowing fire. That was enough. The fleeing men reined in, terrified. They, too, threw down their arms. Within minutes, the entire company was subdued. The majority cowered on their knees, their black banner trampled in the slush. Daenerys guided Drogon closer, glaring down at them. Jon landed Regal nearby, dismounting to begin disarming the mercenaries, seizing crossbows and swords. One wounded man clutched a scorched arm, staring at Daenerys through pain-blurred eyes. "Mercy," he gasped. "We were only following orders. The pay was good, we didn't mean to." Daenerys' fury crackled. "You slaughtered innocent villagers. Burned homes. For what cause? A phantom claim to a throne that does not exist." She signaled Grey Worm, who had arrived at the gallop with Davos and Arya. "Gather these men. The ones who threw down their arms might yet face trial. Those who continue to resist, subdue them or cut them down." Grey Worm nodded, eyes cold, and the Unsullied set to work, binding the mercenaries' hands. Arya oversaw the process, ensuring none tried to slip away. Davos surveyed the carnage, shaking his head. They never stood a chance. Not against dragons. Jon returned from searching the bodies, a grim look on his face. "I found documents, letters with strange seals referencing a true dragon in exile. They mention black banners and an eventual march on King's Landing." He handed them to Daenerys. No specific name, but repeated references to the old feud between Targaryen and Blackfyre lines. Daenerys turned the parchment over in her gloved hands. The words glared back at her, "Our rightful lineage, the seat that was usurped." A swirl of half-literate nonsense about prophecy and lost swords. She felt a surge of disgust. Someone out there is inciting this. We can't let them fester. Davos peered over her shoulder. Could it be that the rumor of a hidden Blackfyre descendant is real? Or is it just a con? Before he could finish, a strangled cry rose from one of the captured mercenaries, a younger man who had been half-buried under the banner. He lunged at Daenerys, a concealed dagger in hand. The Unsullied tried to grab him, but he slithered free. Daenerys had no time to draw a weapon. She thought to call Drogon, but the man was too close, eyes wild with fanaticism. A blur of movement cut him off, Arya Stark. She pivoted in, swift as a viper, steel gleaming. Her blade pressed to the man's throat even as he stumbled forward. He froze, the dagger dropping from his fingers. His eyes flicked in panic between Arya's calm face and Daenerys' stunned expression. "You will not harm the queen," Arya said flatly, then forced him to the ground with a twist of her wrist. The man yelped in pain. Daenerys exhaled in relief. "Thank you," she managed, heart pounding. Arya shrugged, stepping back. "You need better watchers, Your Grace." Grey Worm and the Unsullied quickly restrained the would-be assassin. Daenerys steadied herself, scanning the rest of the captives for any more signs of desperate aggression. None moved. Fear coated their faces. The stench of soot and burnt flesh lingered in the cold air. With the threat contained, Daenerys turned to the group. "You'll be taken to King's Landing to face justice. If you cooperate, you might be spared. If you resist, you die here." She raised her voice, letting it echo across the snowy plain. "As for your so-called leader, he lies in ashes." A hollow silence followed. The surviving mercenaries offered no argument. Daenerys felt a pang of weariness, another spark of violence snuffed out, but how many more might flare? She had dreamed of a united realm free of war, yet pockets of unrest blossomed like weeds. They spent the remainder of the day organizing the prisoners, bandaging the wounded, and salvaging what stolen goods they could. The crossbows used by the mercenaries were decent but not strong enough to penetrate a grown dragon's hide. Still, it underscored the point that scorpions or advanced weapons could eventually pose a threat. Daenerys reminded herself that vigilance was paramount. That night, they camped under a star-laced sky, the flames of their bonfire dancing in the wind. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion nested nearby, their forms dark silhouettes against the glow of distant embers. Daenerys sat with Jon, Arya, and Davos studying the letters they'd recovered. Arya traced her finger along one crude seal. A stylized dragon, but with reversed coloring from your banner. The letter mentions forging alliances in Essos, stirring cells word groups. They claim an heir who will cross the sea to depose you, Daenerys. Jon's jaw tightened. All talk unless they have real resources. But we should be sure. Davos nodded. If there's money behind it, some lesser lords or foreign backers could be fueling this conspiracy. Might tie back to the wildfire plot in Dorne. Could be the same group or a rival faction trying to sabotage your reign and pave the way for a false claimant. Daenerys lifted her gaze to the sky, letting the swirl of campfire smoke sting her eyes. She recalled the Red Priestess Rhaenyra's warnings of shadows rising from Valyria. But this smacked more of a Blackfire resurgence than a Valyrian sorcerer. Still, the world was vast and danger could come from many angles at once. She rubbed her temples. We'll take these prisoners to King's Landing, interrogate them. Maybe they'll give up their paymaster. If a real claimant is out there, they must be found. If it's just a rumor, stamping it out early will prevent it from growing. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. We stand with you. The realm you rebuilt won't fall to some pretender's dream. We have the dragons, no force on land can match that. Daenerys offered him a tired smile. Yes, we have the dragons. But I don't want the next 100 years to be shaped by fear, either. I'd rather they come to me in peace. Arya stoked the fire. Peace isn't always an option with zealots. Daenerys couldn't deny it. She stared into the fire, the flickers reminiscent of dragon flame. Once again, she reminded herself that unstoppable might did not guarantee lasting harmony, only a chance to keep the worst horrors at bay. The rest required patience, cunning, and a willingness to show mercy when possible but unyielding resolve otherwise. They marched south with their prisoners at a slower pace, escorted by a fraction of the Unsullied. The rest scoured the land for further pockets of Bloodsworn. Drogon and Viserion patrolled the skies each day, ensuring that no ambush threatened the caravan. A few times, they spotted smaller groups of Sel's words scattered in the countryside, but these men fled at the sight of dragons overhead. Upon reaching the outskirts of King's Landing, Daenerys found that Tyrion had already heard rumors of the engagement. He greeted them outside the city gates, flanked by Missandei and a contingent of city guards. So these are the Bloodsworn, Tyrion said, eyeing the ragged line of prisoners. Not so fearsome without their leader. Daenerys dismounted from Drogon. They'll face trial. Have them questioned carefully. I need to know who's financing them. Whether it's some foreign sponsor or a homegrown conspirator. Tyrion nodded. We'll pry them open. A few might talk if offered leniency. Then we can unravel this madness about a true dragon heir. Daenerys motioned for the column to continue into the city. The townsfolk stared at the prisoners, curiosity mingling with relief that these bandits would no longer terrorize the roads. The dragons circled overhead, a living reminder that the crown tolerated no such raids. At the Red Keep, the prisoners were placed in secure cells, while Daenerys convened with her council in the throne room. Jon, Arya, Davos, Grey Worm, Missandei, and Tyrion gathered at the foot of the Iron Throne. The chamber felt imposing, the high windows letting in shafts of afternoon sun that illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Tyrion laid out newly received letters from Dorne and the Stormlands. No further wildfire caches found, thank the gods, but there's talk of mercenaries in other corners. Unrelated or part of the same network? Hard to say. Also, Rhaenyra the Red Priestess has asked again for an audience, claiming new visions about threats from the east. Daenerys suppressed a groan. Always new threats. All right, let's see her. But not until we've gleaned what we can from the Bloodsworn. Arya leaned against a pillar, arms crossed. Perhaps I should help with the questioning. I know a few tricks to make men talk. Her tone was half jesting, half serious. Tyrion gave her a wary smile. I suspect your presence alone might terrify them. But let's try a gentler approach first. If that fails, we'll consider your methods. Jon glanced at Daenerys, a question in his eyes. What about the rest of the realm? Should we alert every lord to watch for these banners? They might pop up anywhere, harassing villages. Daenerys considered. Yes, send ravens. Advise them to watch for black banners with a red dragon insignia. If any appear, let them know the crown stands ready to help, but we also don't want lords panicking or punishing innocent travelers. We must keep order. Davos cleared his throat. And if these rumors about a hidden claimant prove true? Another Targaryen pretender or a so-called Blackfire? We'll have to challenge them directly. They might try to slip in from overseas or incite local rebellions. Daenerys turned to the Iron Throne, running her gaze over the swords fused by dragonfire centuries past. We'll handle that if it comes. For now, we make it clear no one has the right to the throne except House Targaryen, which I represent. We've already proven that no force, no matter how cunning, can slay our dragons. A murmur of agreement rose from the council. Nevertheless, Daenerys felt the tug of unease. The world was never short on those who believed themselves rightful kings. With unstoppable dragons, she held the advantage, but cunning men could still cause havoc before being crushed. One by one, they departed to carry out her orders. Soon, Daenerys stood alone by the throne, letting the chamber's silence press in. She thought of the old Targaryen kings and queens, how they, too, had faced rebels and pretenders. The seeds of new conflict might already be sown, yet she would not shrink from it. If she had to quell more uprisings to secure peace, so be it. Outside, Drogon roared faintly, perhaps settling onto a battlement. Daenerys took that as a sign of reassurance. The realm was under her protection, and that of her living juggernauts. No matter what illusions or conspiracies arose, the unstoppable dragons would guard the future she was building. Early the next morning, Daenerys granted Rhaenyra, the Red Priestess, an audience in the smaller council chamber, hoping to keep the meeting discreet. Rhaenyra entered in her crimson robes, eyes bright with fervor. She bowed deeply, pressing a hand to her golden necklace. "Your Grace, the Lord of Light blesses this day. I bring tidings from my visions." Daenerys sat behind a carved wooden table, flanked by Tyrion and Missandei. Grey Worm stood watch by the door, expression impassive. Jon had gone to oversee the interrogation of the Bloodsworn with Davos. Arya lingered in the shadows, curious but silent. "Speak plainly," Daenerys said, resting her chin on her hand. "What do you see?" Rhaenyra lifted her gaze. "Fire does not lie. I see a swirling darkness beyond the seas, old powers stirring. I see a shape of a dragon, crowned in black flame, rising from the depths of Valyria's ruins. And I see your own dragons in mortal battle with it, a clash that could break the very earth if not prevented." Tyrion exchanged a skeptical glance with Daenerys. "Another apocalyptic vision?" Rhaenyra's tone was unwavering. "You may scoff, but I have glimpsed portents that the shattered land of Valyria is not as dead as we believe. Some remnants of black magic remain, blood sorcery that might bind a beast or create a terror to rival your dragons. If this force aligns with a pretender calling themselves a rightful heir, your realm could face a threat beyond any mortal army." Daenerys inhaled slowly. "We already have suspicious mercenaries referencing old Targaryen claims. Now you speak of a monstrous power from Valyria. How do you know the two are linked?" Rhaenyra closed her eyes. "In the flames, I saw black banners and heard the name Blackfire. I saw shadowy conjurations rising from an ancient temple, forging something unholy, a twisted reflection of your dragons, meant to bring ruin." Silence pooled in the chamber. Even Tyrion seemed at a loss for a quick remark. Daenerys studied Rhaenyra. The Red Priestess's expression was earnest, yet there was an otherworldly quality to her gaze. Daenerys recalled how Melisandre's visions had once shaped the war against the dead. Some visions held truth. Others led to misinterpretation. "Suppose I believe you," Daenerys said at last, voice measured. "What would you have me do? Ride to Valyria and burn the ruins to cinders? Many have ventured there and never returned." Rhaenyra spoke calmly. "I do not propose immediate invasion, but vigilance. If the threat is real, it will not remain in the shadows forever. The Lord of Light wills that you stand ready, your dragons, your allies. A confrontation might be inevitable. I merely warn you so that you do not dismiss the possibility until it's too late." Tyrion tapped his fingers on the table. "We can gather knowledge from the Citadel. They have records of Valyria's remnants. Perhaps archmesters could shed light on the notion of hidden enclaves or rumored cults." Daenerys nodded. "Yes, do that. Rhaenyra, remain in King's Landing, but do not spread panic. If your visions prove accurate, we'll need your counsel. If they prove false, no harm done." Rhaenyra bowed. "Thank you, your grace." May the flame guide you." She departed, leaving Daenerys unsettled. Another threat, this one couched in prophecy and riddles. She wanted to dismiss it as a priestess's attempt to gain influence, but the mention of black banners and black fire ties mirrored the mercenaries' claims. Could someone be weaving blood sorcery in Valyria to birth a new dragon-like abomination? It sounded absurd, yet Daenerys had seen enough wonders, undead armies, dragons birthed from stone eggs, men immune to flames, that she could not scoff outright. That evening, Jon returned, reporting that a few of the blood-sworn captives had broken under questioning. They confessed to being hired by agents claiming to represent the true Targaryen line, though none could name that individual. They'd been paid with foreign gold minted in Lys or Tyrosh. One prisoner recalled overhearing talk of a hidden fortress near the Smoking Sea where a greater plan was forming. "This lines up with what Rhaenyra said," Jon noted grimly. "It's too much to be mere coincidence." Daenerys paced in her solar, restless. So it could be that someone in Essos, perhaps near the ruins of Valyria, is stoking these old claims. Funding sells words, planning an invasion. She turned to face Jon. "We can't ignore this. If we let it fester, the realm could be thrown into chaos again." Jon nodded. "Agreed. But how do we respond? Send an army across the sea?" The last time Westerosi kings tried to approach Valyria, they found only doom. Daenerys exhaled. "I won't dispatch thousands blindly. But a scouting party, perhaps. I can fly with my dragons, see what truly lies in those ruins. If there's a threat, we'll burn it before it grows." He frowned, concern in his eyes. "That's risky. The Smoking Sea is treacherous, haunted by whatever cataclysm destroyed Valyria. If dark magic is at play, even dragons might not be safe." She stood resolute. "My dragons are unstoppable, Jon. We overcame the White Walkers. We can face whatever lurks in the shadows of Valyria. If it's a fledgling menace, better to crush it now than wait for it to gather strength." Jon took her hands, voice low. "Then I'm coming with you. I won't let you face it alone." They shared a moment of mutual resolve. Daenerys recognized the hazards. A flight to Valyria was no simple expedition. Yet the alternative, waiting helplessly while conspirators plotted a new cataclysm, felt unthinkable. She had vowed never to be powerless again, never to let the realm she cherished fall into darkness. By the time dawn broke, plans were afoot. Tyrion, Davos, and Grey Worm would maintain order in King's Landing, continuing to suppress any blood-sworn remnants. Arya insisted on joining Daenerys and Jon, partially out of curiosity, partially to ensure no harm befell them. They planned to take only a small retinue. Missandei would stay behind to manage the day-to-day governance. Within 2 days, supplies were assembled for a swift crossing of the Narrow Sea. Daenerys had ships readied at Dragonstone, though she and Jon intended to fly the dragons directly, with Arya traveling by vessel alongside a handful of trusted soldiers. The rest of the expedition, perhaps a dozen, would form a skeleton crew for the ships. They would sail for a volcanic isle near the fringes of Valyria, a place rumored to be somewhat navigable. From there, the dragons could scout the mainland of the ruined peninsula. The morning of departure felt eerily reminiscent of Daenerys' earlier voyages to reclaim her birthright. She stood on the beach at Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of Targaryens, gazing out at a choppy sea. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion perched on cliffs overhead, the wind ruffling their spines. Clouds pressed low, reflecting the brine-scented gloom. Jon approached from behind, wearing practical leather and fur-trimmed cloak. "The ships are provisioned. Arya's double-checking the cargo. We'll meet her near that old Valyrian waypoint you mentioned." Daenerys offered a tentative smile, though tension coiled in her chest. "We should go. Every moment we wait is another moment for these conspirators to move." Jon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll find answers. Then we'll come home." They mounted Drogon and Rhaegal. Viserion soared out from the cliff, letting out a keening cry that scattered gulls below. Within moments, they were airborne, leaving Dragonstone's shoreline to shrink behind them. The ships, sails emblazoned with Targaryen sigils, would follow at their best speed. The flight across the narrow sea was swift but somber. Winds whipped at Daenerys' face, carrying the salt tang of open water. She clung to Drogon's ridges, scanning the horizon for any sign of storms. Jon kept pace on Rhaegal, occasionally shouting questions to her about direction. Viserion flew wide arcs, sometimes diving to the waves to snatch fish. After a day of flight, they spotted their ships far below, forging steadily east. Daenerys guided Drogon to circle down, landing on the deck of the lead vessel with a thunderous impact. Sailors scrambled to secure lines and keep the ship balanced. Arya emerged from below, shielding her eyes from the spray. "We're on course," Arya reported. "The captain says another 2 days, maybe 3, before we reach the Smoking Sea's outskirts." The mention of the smoking sea brought an uneasy hush. Tales of that region abounded with horror, sea monsters, fiery fissures, thick fumes that choked men to death. Sailors insisted that strange currents and hidden reefs made navigation lethal. Yet Daenerys pressed on. In the days that followed, the water grew darker, flecked with volcanic debris. A sulphurous stink wafted on the wind. The dragons seemed uneasy, roosting on the ship's masts rather than circling for long. At last, they approached an isle ringed by jagged black rocks and steaming vents. The water there shimmered with a strange oily sheen. Under a dim, ash-clouded sky, Daenerys' ship anchored in a bay guarded by tall basalt pillars. Jon disembarked with Arya and a few men, scouting the rocky shoreline for a safe camp. Once they established a crude perimeter, Daenerys landed Drogon on a shelf of igneous rock. Heat rose from cracks in the ground, suggesting magma flows beneath. Viserion and Rhaegal found precarious perches along the cliffs, growling at the stinging sulfur in the air. "This place feels cursed," muttered one soldier, a veteran of many campaigns. "Like the earth still bleeds from Valeria's doom." Arya drew her cloak tight, eyes sharp. "We must be cautious. If anything lurks out there, it has all the advantage." That night, they lit torches along the camp's perimeter. The dragons provided additional security, though they grumbled at the foul air. Daenerys tried to rest, but her mind churned with possibilities. If Rhaenyra's vision was accurate, a mortal force might be harnessing old magic here, plotting a fresh cataclysm. If not, perhaps these were merely illusions. But the gloom pressing down on the smoking sea felt all too real. At dawn, Daenerys and Jon took flight to survey the mainland of Valyria. Ancient tales spoke of a land shattered by volcanic cataclysms, its cities devoured by molten rock and toxic fumes. The approach from the air revealed a broken landscape of obsidian shards, steaming fissures, and half-sunken ruins. Twisted spires jutted from ashen plains, half-collapsed arches and towers visible beneath creeping vines of strange, pale growth. Drogon hissed uneasily. Rhaegal beat his wings to maintain altitude as pockets of hot air and swirling ash threatened to buffet them off course. Viserion flew overhead, occasionally letting out a distressed cry as if the environment itself upset him. The stench of sulfur and decay clung to everything. They circled one massive ruin that might once have been a temple or citadel. Its walls crumbled into jagged rubble. Daenerys saw scorched mosaics depicting dragons and the sigils of old Valyrian bloodlines. But no sign of living souls. Only silence, broken by the crackle of volcanic vents. They pressed on, scanning for any sign of a hidden fortress or camp. The hours passed without result. Eventually, they returned to the island camp to regroup. Arya waited with an impatient glint in her eye, anxious for news. Daenerys could only shake her head. "We found nothing yet, just ruins." Arya frowned. There must be something. Could the conspirators be deeper inland? Jon studied a half-unrolled map on a makeshift table. Valyria is vast in its ruin. We could spend months combing every corner. Perhaps we should rely on the dragon's senses. They might detect movement or sense we miss. Daenerys glanced at Drogon and Rhaegal, both resting uneasily on the rocks. "Yes, we'll search again at dawn. The presence of these volcanic vents makes flying tricky, but we'll manage." That night, a creeping sense of dread settled over the camp. Some swore they heard distant wails echoing across the water, or glimpsed pale shapes flitting among the rocky spires. The wind carried odd whispers, half-imagined. Daenerys slept fitfully, dreaming of ancient cities where dragons soared under a blazing sun, only to watch them consumed by molten flames. At daybreak, they rose. Daenerys decided to bring Arya on Drogon's back, though it was risky. If they encountered a threat, Arya's keen instincts might help. Jon would ride Rhaegal while Viserion flew free. A few ships remained anchored, their crew watchful. If something happened, at least they had a fallback. They took flight once more, heading deeper into the labyrinth of ravines and smoking peaks. Obsidian cliffs loomed, exhaling steam from hidden fissures. The dragons roared occasionally, as if challenging the land to show its secrets. Then, near midday, Arya tapped Daenerys' arm, pointing. "Look, there." Far below, nearly hidden by a ridge of black rock, lay a structure that seemed intact, more intact than the surrounding ruins. A squat fortress with massive walls that had been reinforced, the stone appearing newer than the ancient surroundings. Banners fluttered from spires. Black cloth with a red, stylized dragon. The blood-sworn insignia. Drogon hissed, descending slightly. Jon and Rhaegal swung in from the side. Viserion circling overhead. Daenerys' heart pounded. She had found them, the conspirators' hidden lair. As they swept closer, she saw men scurrying on the fortress walls, pointing up at the dragons in alarm. But these men did not flee. Instead, they moved with purpose, dragging huge mechanical contraptions into position. Ballista-like devices, possibly advanced scorpions. Arya scowled. They came prepared. This must be their stronghold. Daenerys tensed, recalling how lesser scorpions once wounded Drogon's shoulder. That had been years ago when he was smaller. Now his scales were thicker. Still, these might be new designs. If the conspirators had harnessed old Balerion knowledge, who knew what cunning weapons they possessed? Swooping around for a closer look, Daenerys spotted something else, a vast central courtyard behind the fortress walls filled with bizarre contraptions. Metal frames, large crucible-like vats. From above, she could see a swirling greenish glow reminiscent of wildfire. A chill ran down her spine. Were they mixing wildfire? Or something worse? Jon guided Rhaegal near. "We could strike now," he called, voice barely audible over the wind. "Burn them before they can fire." Daenerys hesitated, scanning the defenses. She counted at least 6 scorpion-like ballistae on the ramparts. The men were loading them with large, glimmering bolts. A single volley might not kill Drogon, but multiple well-aimed shots could hamper flight. Meanwhile, her curiosity about the courtyard nagged at her. If a potent new weapon brewed there, it could threaten the realm. Arya gripped Daenerys' shoulder. "We can't let them mount a counterattack. We must strike first, or at least land out of range and approach carefully." But the fortress's vantage was strong. Arrows flew upward, though they fell short. The scorpions were pivoting, trying to track the dragon's movements. Daenerys felt Drogon's anger surge. He wanted to burn them from the sky. She steadied him, thinking a direct assault might be risky. Then again, letting these conspirators remain would be worse. Making a snap decision, she signaled Jon. They'd attempt a quick strike, disabling the scorpions. Drogon roared, diving in a blur of black wings. The defenders fired their first volley. Arrows whistled by, missing. A scorpion bolt struck Drogon's flank. Daenerys felt a jolt, but it bounced off his scales with a harsh clang, splintering harmlessly. Relief flooded her. He was indeed too tough now. Drogon unleashed dragon fire, incinerating one scorpion and sending defenders scrambling. Another volley soared upward. This time, Rhaegal took a bolt along his side. Jon cried out, but the bolt glanced off, leaving only a faint scrape. Rhaegal shrieked in anger, releasing a torrent of flame that blasted a portion of the wall. Stone cracked, and men toppled screaming into the courtyard. The fortress erupted in chaos. Some defenders fired crossbows, others tried to extinguish flames. Another scorpion aimed at Drogon, but Arya spotted it. "Right tower," she shouted. Daenerys spurred Drogon to veer aside just as the bolt streaked past. Then Drogon answered with a swath of fire that reduced the tower to molten rubble. Within moments, 3 of the scorpions lay in ruins, the rest abandoned. The fortress defenders fell back, retreating into stone corridors. The courtyard behind the walls glowed with an eerie greenish shimmer, vast containers of some alchemical brew. Daenerys circled overhead, searching for a place to land. If it was wildfire, a single spark could cause a cataclysmic explosion large enough to harm even dragons. Jon soared in on Rhaegal, wiping out another nest of archers with a burst of flame. The fortress ramparts were soon a smoking ruin. Daenerys found an opening in the courtyard, though the presence of those vats disturbed her. Landing might be perilous, but she needed to see. "Brace yourself, Arya," she shouted, guiding Drogon down. They touched the ground in a swirl of ash. The heat from the fires on the walls crackled. Soldiers fled or lay dying. Drogon snarled, shifting to guard Daenerys and Arya as they dismounted. Across the courtyard, Rhaegal settled, Jon jumping down, sword in hand. The vats of glowing liquid bubbled ominously. Daenerys approached with caution. Arya drew her blade, scanning for ambushers. "This can't be normal wildfire," Arya muttered. "It's thicker, more pungent." Daenerys spied a small contraption, a metal rig feeding some black powder into the mixture. She recognized the stench of brimstone. Possibly a blend of wildfire and old Valyrian chemicals meant to replicate some draconic flame. If it ignited, the entire fortress might vanish in a blink. Jon joined them, breathing heavily. "We need to destroy this or remove it. The slightest spark might kill us all." A voice echoed from the shadows, "You're too late, Targaryen." They spun around. A tall figure in black plate armor emerged from a passage, helmet adorned with a twisted dragon crest. His voice carried an eerie resonance. "We have already succeeded. The seeds of a new dragon are sown. Our master shall rise, and you will witness the end of your false reign." Daenerys leveled a glare at him. "Who is your master? Show yourself." He lifted a GA. Untlet, pointing to the steaming vats. "Bound by blood sorcery hatched in black flame. Our rightful king will claim the throne that Aegon stole from House Blackfire. Your creatures are large, yes, but ours shall be unstoppable in ways you cannot fathom." Arya lunged forward, blade at the ready. The man met her with surprising speed, parrying with a short sword that glimmered darkly. Sparks flew. Jon rushed in, but the man flung a small device at the ground, an alchemical pellet that burst into thick, choking smoke. For an instant, Daenerys lost sight of them. Drogon roared, tail lashing. When the smoke cleared, the black-armored figure was gone, vanished through some hidden door. Arya cursed, eyes watering. He fled, left that concoction behind. Jon coughed, searching the courtyard. "We can't chase him blindly. We must neutralize this brew." A new rumble shook the fortress. One of the vats started frothing violently, green foam spilling onto the ground, sizzling. Daenerys realized with horror that the defenders had lit a fuse or triggered something. The entire complex might erupt at any moment. She shouted to Arya and Jon, "Back to the dragons." "Now!" They sprinted across the courtyard. Drogon, sensing the danger, crouched low, wings half spread. Rhaegal likewise roared in agitation. As soon as they mounted, the vats exploded in a chain reaction. A surge of green and black flame shot into the sky, the shockwave cracking walls and hurling debris. Drogon leapt aloft, battered by the blast wave but still airborne. Rhaegal and Viserion followed, buffeted by howling winds of flame. Daenerys clung desperately to Drogon's spines, Arya gripping her waist to avoid being thrown off. Below, the fortress walls collapsed in an inferno of sickly green fire. Shards of stone arced through the air. The ground quaked. Daenerys had faced wildfire before, but this felt more potent, amplified by some vile mixture. Even at altitude, waves of heat curled upward, forcing Drogon to climb higher. When at last the fury subsided, the fortress lay in ruins, a crater of molten rock and green embers. The swirling ash parted, revealing no sign of survivors or that black-armored fanatic. Daenerys' heart pounded. If that man spoke true, some monstrous experiment was already in motion. They circled the blasted site, but little remained. The land cracked, venting steam. No living soldiers, no hidden passages left intact. At length, Daenerys signaled a return to the island camp. Her mind reeled. They had destroyed one nest of conspirators, but the leader had escaped, boasting of a new dragon being born in black flame. If such a thing existed, it threatened everything she'd worked for. Upon returning to camp, they found the ships shaken by the distant explosion. The watchers on deck had seen the green column of flame across the horizon. Daenerys landed, breath still ragged, and slid from Drogon's back. Arya followed, dropping to her knees, coughing out ash. Jon dismounted Rhaegal, face grim. They spoke of a hidden master. "We can't be sure we ended it all by destroying that fortress. They might have other sites or a hidden seat of power." Daenerys wiped soot from her cheek. "We have no clue how extensive this operation is." The man mentioned black sorcery, a twisted dragon. "If that's anything more than lunatic ravings, we're dealing with something beyond sellswords and scorpions." Arya sheathed her blade. "We should return to Westeros with what we've learned. Warn everyone. Prepare if a real abomination rises." Daenerys, heart heavy, nodded. She had come hoping to quell a threat swiftly, yet found only more questions. "Let's gather the ships and sail home. We'll maintain watch on this region. If the conspirators are still active, we'll discover them eventually." They spent a tense night at the island, half expecting further attacks. The horizon glowed faintly where the fortress had been. Strange lights flickered across the clouds, and the ground occasionally rumbled as though the land itself lamented the doom unleashed centuries ago. Daenerys found little rest, her thoughts consumed by the notion of a rival dragon twisted by black arts. She recalled Rhaenyra's warnings about shadows in Valyria, and a chill wormed through her despite the volcanic heat. At dawn, they weighed anchor and departed the smoking sea. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion escorted them, forging west toward clearer waters. No illusions or monsters pursued, at least none they could see. Yet Daenerys sensed this was not the end. The conspirators had scattered, but the seeds of rebellion, perhaps even dark sorcery, remained. The narrow sea crossing back felt longer, weighed down by fatigue and foreboding. Daenerys conferred with Jon, Arya, and the handful of advisors on board. They resolved to intensify their intelligence networks, consult the Citadel about Balerion lore, and remain on high alert for any further Bloodsworn activity. When at last the familiar coast of Westeros appeared, Daenerys released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The Red Keep's towers glinted in distant sunlight, reminding her that home, such as it was, still stood. Landing on Dragonstone first to regroup, they found messages from Tyrion waiting. No major rebellions had flared, but rumors spread that the Crown had confronted sinister forces in Valyria. They pressed onto King's Landing, greeted by the city's teeming docks. Crowds gathered to watch the dragons descend, whispering of the Queen's rumored expedition to accursed land. Daenerys wondered how many rumors would swirl, how many half-truths would catch flame. Yet she was here, alive and unscathed. That alone might bolster confidence, at least for a time. In the days that followed, Daenerys shared with her council the tale of the fortress, the explosion, the black-armored man's boasts. Tyrion listened gravely, leaning on a table scattered with letters. Missandei furrowed her brow, taking notes. Davos rubbed his stubbled chin, muttering how every new threat seemed more fantastical than the last. Grey Worm remained stoic but watchful, prepared to crush any uprising. They decided on a plan. Intensify the search for any Bloodsworn remnants in Westeros, maintain ships near Valyria to monitor suspicious traffic, and consult with learned maesters about the possibility of forging twisted beasts through lost sorcery. Rhaenyra, gleaning that her vision had partially come true, urged Daenerys to remain vigilant for signs of the new dragon. Yet daily governance could not pause. The realm demanded attention. Crops needed distributing, roads needed patrolling, and lords sought audience. Daenerys balanced her sense of looming danger with the practical duties of a monarch. If she neglected them, the realm could fracture from within, leaving an opening for conspirators to strike. Still, she never forgot that final image, a black banner with a red dragon, raised over vats of monstrous fire. The unstoppable might of her own dragons gave her confidence that any abomination would ultimately fail. But the echoes of Valyria's doom weighed heavily, warning that not every threat was easily snuffed out by flame. One morning, Daenerys stood atop the Red Keep's highest parapet, the same place she had once gazed out to sea, yearning for conquest. Drogon perched beside her, his massive form nearly blocking the sunrise. She stroked his scaled neck, feeling the rumble of his breathing. Below, the city spread out, vibrant in the early light. People bustled in the streets, carts rattled, children shouted. A realm that had survived the long night that now pinned its hopes on her. Jon joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into his warmth. They said nothing for a long moment, just watched the awakening city. Drogon let out a soft rumble, arching his neck as if to greet the sun. At last, Daenerys spoke, her voice low. "We have peace, Jon. Fragile but real. I won't let shadows from a dead empire or pretenders to a false throne steal that from our people." He nodded. "We'll face what comes, as we always have. Together." She reached up, tracing her fingers along his cheek. "I sometimes wonder if we'll ever truly be free of threats. Perhaps not. Yet as long as we and our dragons live, we can protect this realm. That's enough." High above, Viserion and Regal soared in a lazy spiral, their silhouettes cast against the brightening sky. The unstoppable guardians of Westeros, each roar a reminder that steel and ice alike had failed to pierce their hides. If a dark flame rose from Valyria, if some twisted beast challenged them, they would meet it in fire and fury. Daenerys took solace in that truth even as she steeled herself for battles yet unseen. And so the Queen stood, hand in Jon's, under the watchful gaze of Drogon. The city below bustled with life, the realm endured, and the next chapter of their story lay unwritten, carrying both hope and the lingering specters of a past that refused to die. If the conspirators in black sought to raise a new monster, they would learn again that no mortal cunning could break the bond between Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons. Their unstoppable wings would shadow the land, a promise to friend and foe alike that the Queen would stand firm, unbowed by the ghosts of history, forging a future where the living might thrive beyond the reach of ancient nightmares.